Well, in certain contexts, it leads to childhood.
Okay, well, I'll have to read up on that.
I think Dorothy Parker said the cure for boredom is curiosity. There's no cure for curiosity.
Following this conversation with Andrew Huberman, his third time on this podcast. He's a brilliant neuroscientist at Stanford University and the host of one of the best, if you ask me, health and science podcasts in the world called Lab Podcast. Check him out on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Most importantly, Andrew is a great human being and has quickly become a great friend. This is the Let's Read the Podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, there's Andrew Huberman. We meet again, my friend. We should talk at each other's podcast once a year. I think we should make it here. I was just talking to the guys, this show called Moody. I don't know if you know it. And yeah, with Louis C.K. And there's this thing called Bang Bang, which people are probably watching know exactly what I'm talking about. It's this worst possible thing you can do in terms of meal, which is you go to a restaurant, do a full meal, and then go to another restaurant and do a full meal. And you exactly. So they go Mexican, Italian, sushi, pizza, barbecue, IHOP, that one is that. This kind of thing reminds me of the joy of food.
Last time we were hanging out, we went to Joe Companies, and then we went to eat Russian food. Yeah. And it was a particularly fun experience to go to a Russian, only person there that can speak Russian. Yeah. And eat Russian food with you. And because I felt walking in, they trusted you. They didn't trust me.
Yeah. The funny thing about the people there, they were talking to you in Russian, and then they refused to sort of switch to English, even though they understood you speaking Russian. This is Russian House in Austin, by the way. Anyway, by way of question, what's the worst or the best, from your perspective, cheap meal? Let's call it a pigging out meal, but it could be a cheap meal that you've ever had or you want to have that's like on the bucket list or something that's in the past, like where you did something like a Bang Bang, which is like you're talking about multiple thousands of calories that you just feel horrible about yourself. You still keep eating because it's delicious, but also great company. Something about the atmosphere is just right. Screw the diet, screw all the things just like you should be doing. Just throw it all.
I've done that. I don't do this anymore, but the entire time I was a postdoc, so 5 years, and the entire time I was a pre-tenured professor, so 5 years, I basically followed the Tim Ferriss slow carb diet, which is, people can look it up, but it worked really well. It was basically some like good animal proteins, fish and meat and things like that. Oh, the slow carb is like low glycemic stuff. Is mostly lentils and things and vegetables. No dairy, anyway, but then one day in there, so it wasn't low carb, it was low glycemic carb, and I did that and it worked terrifically well just for energy levels because I want to be able to train to work. And then one day a week, you're supposed to go full cheat day. And so I would do what used to be 12 hours, but then it became 24. You start to redefine what the day is. And that was when Costello was pretty young, and we would do it together. So I would get pizzas and croissants and donuts, and I would just do the full thing. And by the end of the day, you don't want to look at an item. You're just repulsed by food. The only modification I made was the next day I would fast, just to avoid the gastric distress of food. And so I would do them on Sundays, and then Mondays I'd fast all day, and then by Tuesday I felt pretty good again. But Sunday and Monday, where you just feel like you're sliding down the slope of just blood sugar disaster.
Terrible idea.
At the time, I enjoyed it. I like donuts, croissants, all that kind of stuff. What's interesting is after stopping that whole protocol, now I just try to protocol. Now I do a pseudo intermittent fasting. I'm not really strict. I'll start it around 11. Eat my first meal around 11. We should train in the morning. Eat my last bite of food somewhere around 8 or 9, and I'm not super strict. I might have two meals, and then maybe a little bit of snack.
I have to fast 24 hours.
Never done a long fast except when I was doing the cheat days, and then And actually, there were a couple different ways to do cheat days that were fun. Like you were in the city, you could try all the restaurants that you wanted. Yeah, and I think Tim and our mutual friend John Romanello did I think it was like a cheat day marathon where they did, marathon's 26.3 miles. They went to 26.3 different locations in New York and put it on an app. I never took it to that extreme, but
Wait.
overcoming it, that was
What?
because they were,
Just a little bit of something at each place.
yeah, exactly. I mean, there are things that guys do in their 30s that you just shouldn't do in your 40s. I can say that because I'm in my 40s. And now I just try and eat well most days. And what's interesting is about 12 to 14 months ago, I completely lost all appetite for sweets. I don't know what happened. I still love savory foods, so meat, butter, cheese, and I love vegetables too, that I food also, but lost all appetite. So if you put a donut in front of me or ice cream or something, it's almost aversive to me, and I don't know what happened. I don't know what changed.
Probably scientific explanation.
Sure.
It says to do maybe
Neuron
habits.
levels.
The sugar, the desire for that rush maybe is gone from your soul. Well, what was the most delicious thing? Croissant donuts. What is there a thing that
There's a place in Portland, I don't know if it's still open, called Little T's Bakery, and they have croissants that easily rival the croissants in Paris. People make a lot of the history in Paris, but it's really the bread in Paris that's amazing. We lived there when I was a kid, did a sabbatical there, and there they do the baguette morning bake and afternoon bake, and there's nothing like the bread in Paris, or the people, and but if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you can find amazing croissants there.
what do you do with the croissant? What do you do with the bread? Butter or is it just like sugar?
I don't eat them anymore. I don't have much of an appetite for them, even though they're not a sweet food. But I'm always putting butter on the butter. No jam. I would never adulterate.
I have to actually be honest about this because people talk about steak and they talk about bread, butter. I feel like butter's cheap. I feel like you're disrespecting the fundamental food by adding butter. Butter is like a elite version of ketchup.
There we diverge because for me, bread is just a vehicle for ketchup. A cracker is just a vehicle for cheese.
Oh, so that's just the cracker and the bread is just texture.
It's just like people look at you funny if you just eat the butter straight, which occasionally I do.
I got it.
But so I put a little piece of bread underneath it, not because I'm a low carb, low carbs, but just because otherwise it gets.
It's like pasta is a vehicle for some pasta sauce. It's interesting. Unlike Indian non-bread, you have bread. I've had a lot of soul searching on which part of India brings me so much joy. Is it the bread or is it all the sauce?
There we diverge again because for whatever reason, no disrespect to anyone, but Indian food doesn't.
Well, you're lucky because the number of calories in that food is like non-bread. I don't know how non-bread is made, but I think it's just so oil and it's just very intensely. Like the density of calories is very, very high. For me, barbecue, I would say, is probably
Anytime I start thinking about barbecue, I do love meat. My dad's Argentinian. I love steak. I mean, Argentina chorizo sausage is an appetizer before you have steak.
it's meat on top of meat.
And it's not just the men, right? You see women, sometimes very petite women, eating steaks that are bigger than their skull size. Slowly, they eat very slowly, and they all eat dessert too. And they generally do this with 1 meal per day. So that kind of reflects.
That's how I think about it because I also eat one meal a day, especially when I'm traveling. It feels like a cheap meal because it gives you a bit more freedom to just lose yourself in the quantity. I did the 3-day fast and I ate chicken breast, like literally chicken breast with nothing else, just grilled. And it was the most delicious piece of meat I've ever eaten. And that gives you the problem is when you fast for 3 days, you really can't take out. You really shouldn't.
Your stomach is from inside already. Your gut microbiome is almost completely depleted by fasting. A lot of people think, cleanses and fasts are great for the microbiome. They quash your microbiome. However, when you start eating again, the microbiome comes back better than it was before you fast.
For people who don't know, Sergey and Todd are on the call. They're kind of pulling stuff up. They just pulled up Phelps with I forget how many calories you eat. 10,000.
You know what's interesting? There's some cool physiology around this. The reason he needed to eat so much is not that he was burning that many calories in pure movement. It's that when you do exercise in water, even if it's warm water, the heat transfer of water is greater, so you burn far more calories. And again, here I'm admittedly lifting that from knowledge that was passed on to me by Tim Ferriss. But I checked it out, and it's absolutely true. So if you exercise in water, even if it's not really cold water, your caloric needs go way up, which is why I like to get out of the pool.
And for fans of the Humor Lab podcast, and if you're not a fan, what are you doing in your life? You would probably chuckle at the fact that Andrew just cited his sources on that statement. Because you're so good at it. I don't know how your memory works, but the only person whose memory is better than Joe Rogan is yours.
But my colleagues joke, PubMed sort of scrolls. Also in science, as you know, attribution is so big into what we do. And I think that it's interesting because I'm now spending a lot of time on social media. Attribution is not as common. And but in academia, you learn really early on that if you give a talk about your data and you cite all these amazing sources, all it does is make you look better. Right? Whereas in social media and elsewhere in the business sector, it's almost like citing other people. People feel as if it's going to take away some of the credit. All it does is place you in the company with a really nice work. So I have genuine and tremendous respect for Tim. He's been about 10 years ahead on a huge number of health-related things and other things. Extremely kind person, very thoughtful person. So it's also just a pleasure to shine light on it.
Yeah, well, I actually push back. I know there's a culture of if you write a paper, standing on the shoulders of giants is a powerful thing. But there's also a culture of not giving credit to the strongest idea of the paper and instead say it's kind of applied and it's original. There is a culture of kind of not celebrating others. I think people get most competitive in all walks of life, but especially in science, when the closer they get in exactly the thing they work on. And so there's this dance. There's a few researchers in each of the individual little things that you work on. If you're studying a particular kind of ant, you know that other asshole that also is studying that particular ant, and then you're not going to often give credit for the brilliant ideas that other researcher is doing. And I think one of the things you've discovered, and just as part of your nature, and which is why it's really great that you have an audience and you inspire others to do the same, is you celebrate that other ant study. It's great, and everybody wants to raise all boats. But that initial instinct to be like, what is it, Borat? Like my neighbor gets a toaster, I get a bigger toaster than that.
Yeah, that mindset. It's not that I'm not competitive in certain domains, but I get great pleasure from sharing things that I find, and I think that at the end of the day, you're as strong as your community, and you can build a wonderful community just by pointing out things that you love. Like these are all just loves. I see a paper and I love it. Only rarely do I think, I wish we had done that. I usually think, fantastic, now I can just focus on something else because they check off that box.
And by the way, you mentioned PubMed and barbecue, right? I should mention that I got a chance to hang out with Rick Rubin, thanks to you. He's a friend of yours, and we made the connection. That was a huge gift to my spirit. I guess he's a truly, truly special human being. And there's a lot I could say about why he's a special human being. I'd love to learn how you met him, but I should also just mention on the PubMed thing, it was so interesting talking to him about music, and both on the podcast and privately, and just listening to music together. Because when you mention a song, he does this thing where he like closes his eyes and he finds that song in the album that we're talking about, and he steps through the album. You could see the brain like stepping through individual songs to find that song in the album. And there's that kind of look up process, and then he puts himself mentally in that space of like, okay, this is whatever the album is, and not just the ones he produced, but all of these, an encyclopedia of music. And it's so interesting. It also, the thing I really love about it is something like a calmness that radiates from him. It's okay to close your eyes and place yourself in the place where that album was recorded, in the feeling of that album. I like that silence. Let's go there. Let's go there together. It's Alice in Wonderland. We'll go there together.
You do a good Rick Rubin, minus the beard.
Minus the beard.
His beard is epic, right? You can't fake a beard like that. You know?
How'd you guys meet?
Yeah, well, Rick, I'm very blessed to consider a close friend. Rick and I got introduced through a common friend during the pandemic, and we started doing some FaceTime together, just talking about things related to science and health. I'm not a musician. I have musical ability or talent. I have a good beat to memorize lyrics, and I love lyrics, and I love poetry. So I asked him a lot of questions about musicians that I happen to love, that he's worked with and knows, and so he would give stories about musicians, and I would talk to him about health, and then eventually we formed a friendship where we would talk about a number of different topics in life. And then we started spending time together in person when he was in town. And as you now know, Rick, in addition to all his incredible accomplishments, has an incredible understanding of how to get the brain and body into state, right? And as you pointed out, he's willing to do the things that allow him to help these incredible artists get into the best state to do their craft. And so if he needs to sit there and be quiet with his eyes closed for a minute or two or more, he'll do that. He has routines to allow himself to get into state. And it's really inspiring to think about states of mind as something that, we'd all love to just flip the switch and say we're focused or we're creative, but to actually ratchet through the challenging steps in order to do that and figure out what one needs to do on a regular basis to get into a proper state. It's not just going to come from a cup of coffee, a lamp of a particular wavelength or something. It's going to be those things, but it's also going to be really teaching oneself how to get into proper state.
Yeah, you did an episode on hypnosis. Do you think it's a kind of self-hypnosis?
Yeah, I do. Because hypnosis is you limit the context, you're very alert, and you're very calm. And he has a number of these different practices, and so we will talk about those. And then we also have enjoyed a lot of discussions about deep neuroscience. In fact, I introduced Rick to a friend of mine who's a neurosurgeon and neuroscientist, and they've become friendly. Rick is one of these people that he sort of defies definition. Incredibly kind, incredibly private person too. So I'm being respectful of that. But and then of course, he's a podcast. So when I learned that, I just made natural sense to introduce you. And I know he really enjoyed meeting you. And we talk about you a lot. And of course, in a positive light. I think his dedication to getting into these states of mind have completely transformed my routines around life. Like, for instance, before doing a very long podcast recording, the solo ones, which often take me several hours or more, 6 hours to record, sometimes more, sometimes less, I realized that there's a certain brain state associated with that. So I have to really limit the kind of interactions I have for the 2 hours before. I actually walk and talk out loud through my neighborhood. People think I'm crazy, but I live in a neighborhood where there are a lot of crazy creatives anyway.
So say you're not crazy.
Well, at least institutionally, right? Yeah. But getting into state of mind is something we all just imagine we flip the switch. But Rick really convinced me you have to do the work to do the work.
Can you maybe linger on that, elucidate a little bit more your process of how you get in that space? That's really interesting because I have to admit I do everything last minute before a podcast. I don't know. There's a lot of anxiety because, whatever, if I have to pack, if I have to set up stuff, you were luckily a few minutes, you showed up a few minutes later.
Which for an academic, right
on time. But the stress is immense. And on top of that, you look at a situation with Rick Rubin, I had to set up microphones in front of him. It's just that stress, the anxiety.
He knows a lot about microphones.
What do you say? Really about how close do you like the microphone to be? I think
that's a very Rick Rubin kind of thing, right? That the details really matter. The details really matter, right down to your relationship to the microphone. Yeah, distance and whether or not it brings out the tone. But of course, that's what he does. He produces music. Right?
But he also said, he is the professional. He said, how close do you like it to be? and he said it with a gentleness where I had like an existential crisis, where I don't know. He gave me so much like, wow, like he made me feel like an artist, like that the microphone distance is a decision you're supposed to make.
Well, I have to say, and this has actually come up in some of our conversations, but you are an artist. And actually, Joe Rogan, once I heard him talking about podcasting and the fact that he's always trying to get better at it, and he described podcasting as an art, right? And it's a certain level of communication, and there's a cadence and a rhythm that when it's working, it really facilitates the transfer of information. When it's not, it doesn't. I mean, obviously, Joe, just being himself, has tapped into that cadence that allows and makes so many people excited to hear him talk.
Well, in his case and in general, I think part of the art is refusing the world as you get a bigger audience change who you are.
There's one quote that I've seen out there where he says, I'm like talking about himself, he says, I'm like the fish that got through the net. There's no stage version of him, right? How he is person is how he is out in the world. And of course there's nuance to his life, right? And his different relationships, of course. But it's true. I mean, we've had the great fortune of spending time with him out away from the microphones, so to speak. Joe is Joe.
So can you speak to that process? You mentioned the walking and the talking to yourself. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I try and do a couple of things. First of all, when I was a kid, I had a little bit of a grunting tick. When I was 5 or 6, I feel this buildup of tension in my throat, and I would do this grunting tick. If I get very tired, I start to hear it still. We actually know that this is related to these basal ganglia circuits with go, no go. You got an accelerator and a brake, basically, in your neural circuitry. And kids with Tourette's and OCD, the brake doesn't work quite as well. And so one thing that happens is if I wake up in the morning, and especially if I'm well rested, if I'm not well rested, I do a hypnosis or yoga nidra in order to recover my sleep. That works really well. But then once I'm into the process of preparing the podcast, I've already gone through my notes. I know what I want to say more or less, kind of general contour. And then I take a walk, and I try to, so no phone with me, and I try to assess whether or not my energy is too high or too low for podcasting. Because with podcasts, you have to punch out a lot of material, but then there's times when you slow down and emphasize and take a lift. And so what I do, I've never revealed this, what I do actually is I will recite the lyrics of songs for about 10 minutes, songs I love, while I walk out loud.
It comes in and focuses you. What does it do?
I think it gets my vocal cords warmed up, and it also,
do you sing or speak?
I often sing, and unfortunately nobody hears. And as I do this, I start to evaluate whether or not I'm straining to get the words out, or whether or not I'm straining to make them slow enough so that I can articulate them. So there are days when I have so much energy that I'm trying to speak faster than I should in order to articulate properly. There are other days when I'm tired and I can't sort of keep up with my thoughts. And so what I try and do is assess that and then adjust the transmission, the RPM, so to speak, first that I can speak very quickly and then I can slow down. So I can change the cadence of my voice. And when you teach in the classroom, you learn, as you know, because you're excellent lectures in the classroom, as you teach in the classroom when you want to slow down, every teacher knows you turn to the whiteboard or chalkboard and you start writing, right? It gives you a break. And then you turn around and you fire back the kind of machine gun fire of information, and then you slow down and you underline something. When you podcast, you don't have that opportunity. There are no visuals in the podcast. So what I try and do is always get my voice warmed up and make sure that I'm thinking and speaking at approximately the same rate. And then I also do this thing that I put my vision into panoramic vision when I walk, which is very calming. And then I actually start to remind myself of the purpose of podcasting. It sounds very mission statement-y, but you asked what I do. I remind myself first and foremost that what I want to communicate, what I want to come through is the beauty and utility of biology. And I only feel comfortable with saying the word beauty publicly now about science things thanks to you, because I think
beauty.
Yeah, love and beauty.
Dr. Andrew Huberman.
Love and beauty, but also darkness and hatred. If you're talking about the live streaming podcast, you have to address the shadow also. think about I want to communicate the beauty and utility of biology. And then I check my emotional state. I want to make sure that I'm not angry about anything. And certainly if I am, then I will set it aside from the podcast, because that's not a place for my whatever I might be dealing with. I also really start to feel into the parts of the research and the papers I found that I really love, because that's the part of me that I like the most, frankly. And on the podcast, if there's a paper, like for instance, we have a podcast coming out soon about heat as a tool, sauna, but some other things. And in researching this, I learned so much about these heat shock proteins and the use of sauna in Finland for increasing growth hormone, but also for the treatment of mental illness. And I realized I fell in love with this literature. It's just a beautiful literature. These people are true pioneers for doing this work. Now everyone's in the sauna, but this was 20 years ago. The way the experiments were done were amazing, with all these Finnish people, from couples up there, rectum to measure temperature, swimming in pools. It's hilarious and great. So I start to think about it, and I think, I just start to really access my love of the work. And then when we finally sit down, and my producer Rob and I record, I just sort of want to just bask in sharing it. Just like the little version of me when I was 6 or 7, I used to spend all weekend reading the encyclopedia, Guinness Book of World Records, making my mother drive me places to introduce me to. I had this obsession with trapping animals when I was a kid, meet these people. And then on Monday, I would insist on giving a lecture class to kids. So that's basically what it is. I just try and access that childlike energy. And so I want to be clear. The goal is always to make it interesting, clear, and actionable, and it's also surprising. But that's basically the process. But yeah, I'm singing and talking and getting into state. And I used to feel very sheepish about sharing any of this. It's the first time I've ever shared it out. But Rick was the one who encouraged me to find a process that works and continue to develop that process and not let anything get near that process. People in my personal life know this, and when it's time, it's like, I don't care what else is going on. I'm moving into that brain state.
There's probably a process like that for anything that you do in life that you take seriously. So the people that perfected this athletes, like Olympic level athletes, they have to have a process like this.
And I think Tiger Woods actually was taught self-hypnosis quite young, and used self-hypnosis often during his tournaments, sometimes to great success and other times less.
Is there other places in life that you use kind of a protocol, like a mental protocol to get ready?
Many of the best areas of life are their own form of hypnosis, right? You know that you're in hypnosis if, for instance, you're in a movie and something happens and you feel the emotional lift without being self-conscious about it. Yes, I think that one thing that we've tried to do in our house is around meal times to try and set a state that food isn't just something that we just throw down our throats. And I'm fortunate that my partner cooks really well, and so I try and give her the space to do that. And that's a whole thing of her getting into state. And then
for the cooking, the preparation of all
I can just see it. I just see the way she approaches the whole thing and the pleasure of serving it. And I'm an eater, not a cooker. But
both are important roles. You can be a very good eater. Like there's something about, is there anything better in this world than that feeling, especially with the family, getting around a table, just the warmth of that. I don't know, it's like the cold outside of the cruel world cannot touch you in this place that you return to. And if,
did you grow up eating meals as a kid?
Yeah.
I mean, no television.
Well, I didn't really have television, period, outside of meals. And so most of my time was spent, like a stray cat, outdoors, just running around, playing soccer.
Imagine you're in this dirt or concrete lot between two very high-rise buildings, playing soccer in athletic gear that you only see in Eastern Europe. You know how you come to the States and people wear their gear. You go to Europe and you see, here's the soccer culture. Yeah. But you see athletic gear that you just don't see anywhere.
That's interesting. I mean, I grew up pretty poor, so first of all, I was always wearing my brother's an older brother's close. And they were like old, my favorite things were American things that I didn't understand. A Pepsi shirt or something. And it was just, that was the gear. It was like too large for me, but I thought I was the coolest person ever, just wearing the fancy, like Kanye, type of fashion.
There's something about it, I feel like in Eastern Europe, they wear athletic gear where like the guys like zip up.
Yeah, that's like fancy stuff. That's if you like, those are the cool kids. Like the cool soccer players, football players that, like they were in a league of some kind, so they would get uniforms, or they somehow. I always thought anyone who had anything nice had to do something really bad to get it. That was my way to view of the world, because I guess I didn't understand how it's possible to be rich. Because most of us were surrounded by people who are poor, and that life is beautiful and simple. It's like, why do you escape that life? But you still admire the cool, one got McDonald's. It was like, what kind of world does this place come from? Like, who invented this? This is a fascinating view from a child's perspective of capitalism, essentially.
Yeah. But the fact you ate dinner together is really interesting. My parents divorced when I was an adolescent, so then there was a total fracture of any family structure. But prior to that, we ate dinner together every night. I was expected to know how to use my knife fork. It was like a very structured thing. I don't know if I ever had kids, they're going to do that. Certainly. Actually, on the way over here, I was thinking, I really wanted a lot of kids. I mean, like a whole litter. And I was thinking, if Lex has kids and I have kids, then we can pit them against each other with jujitsu. Yeah. This is my chance at redemption.
The long game.
Soccer, right? They'll all want to be engineers or physicists. Yeah. They won't want to be biologists. But in all seriousness, I look forward to the day that our kids play together.
Yeah, I think there's something. So the family dinner, the ritual of the family dinner, like that, but also the special occasion dinners. Like there's a little bit more preparation, a little bit more cooking, whether for the weekend or for some holiday. In Russia, it was a thing that actually I find completely missing for the most part. In America, is there was neighbors. There was you broke the walls between families, which were common. Like there would be kind of regular characters, like a sitcom almost. If you watch a sitcom, it's never just the family. There's always like other characters that's bursting in the door.
Let's start doing that here. Start showing everybody. I know where you live.
I think people want to respect, Michael Mouse that lives next door, and I think people want to respect each other's privacy or something like that. And I think we all get super busy, and like it's kind of work to do this dinner together, or if you see it's a thing that needs to be scheduled, it's work. You get busy. There's a lot of stuff going on, but if it's part of a ritual, a part of the culture, that all of those walls get broken down, and then you realize that's like later looking back, those are the things you miss. Like that's what life is about. Like all the stupid stuff you're doing in terms of career, whatever, all the busy things, those don't matter. What matters is
in academia, it's changed in the last few years, of course. But one of the great joys was professors would stop by your office and you have nobody set up an appointment. There's a guy when I was a professor in San Diego, a guy named Harvey Cardinal, he's a member of the National Academy. He's truly the world's expert in the evolution of vision and evolution of brains generally. And he would show up in my lab and he would just start talking to the students and postdocs. And and then a pure encyclopedia. And then at some point he'd say, "Hey, Harvey, I gotta go. You have to be kidding me, right?" Or this guy, he's a physicist, David Kleinfeld. He was same way. Actually, David Kleinfeld's interesting. A student of his went on to create the Beavis and Butthead cartoon, and one of them is David. He's a professor. People can look him up. And David's one of those guys who just walk into your office, you just sit down, and you just start talking to him. And so there's a kind of a family feel. It's like Cheers or Seinfeld or one of those shows where somebody just walks in. I think you and I both share a love of the community around things. And podcasting is a little bit more isolated. I should say for the guest episodes, the preparation preparation is completely different because it's more conversation. And so there, I don't do any of this business of putting myself into state. I just try to make sure that the guest is taken care of, and I do list out the questions I'm going to ask before. But those, I actually really like the interview episodes far more than I like just doing the solo ones.
They're psychologically.
I just like learning from someone directly. Yeah, because you asking an expert about something, like sitting here with you when we recorded a podcast and you were a guest on the People in that podcast, and for the first time, and finally, someone was explaining to me the difference between machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all these other things. You know, and I've finally forgiven you for making me cry about Castello. But it helped me move through it. But in all seriousness, the interview ones are a sheer pleasure. The solo ones I really enjoy, but they're work. So I think.
Well, it's interesting because I do think prepping for interviews is having a similar process might be also very valuable. Like I have to think about that because I think when you do a conversation for several hours, especially when it's a high stakes one, it's not like what you and I know. It's more like it's just chatting. And so
World order is although you never know.
you never know.
Knowing you, will probably be into some pretty controversial topics.
Oh,
You
boy.
like to ride the edge.
Oh boy.
There are a number of topics that I just completely avoid, and my response to those is always that I have a lot of opinions about that, not a lot. So, yeah. But whereas you've become far braver in terms of the topics you'll encounter, and some of your guests have been very controversial. Right? Some of them are people that a lot of people don't like, and you've been willing to just sit down and maybe it's the jiu-jitsu thing.
You know, I don't know. It is tricky. And one of my goals for this year is to talk to people that a lot of people really don't like.
And here I am.
For people like prison, major political leaders, I've been thinking a lot about how to talk to really difficult, controversial figures, but find together something with them that's deeply honest about their nature, about the ideas they have about the world, like reveal something real. And some people, you have to be very careful. Some people are very good at hiding the real inside them, room from themselves. That's something I think about a lot. I think about dictating to the past and I put myself in the mindset, well, how do you reveal something real about this person to themselves? I think that to me, you kind of spoke to that, but a great conversation is one where both of you discover something real. Like it's not just. So I love that too. That's my favorite thing that you mentioned, which is allowing your curiosity to ask all kinds of questions, get excited to learn from an expert, but also to push them to discover something about themselves, about their ideas together, and then that discovery. And sometimes it's like we don't see it in the moment, but the audience hears it. It's weird to say. Like I would compare it to when you're a musician, you play with other musicians. You lose yourself in the moment. Yeah, it's all. It's like it's working right. It's working, but you don't really see the big picture impact of what it's working right actually feels like, and that's where the audience can see that. Like, if you talk to somebody evil, uh, for me as an interviewer, I have to empathize with that person. If I want to understand, I have to put myself in that mind space. And to put yourself in that mindset, you really have to become that. You have to understand the evil inside of you. Like you can't just think if somebody's in power and has used that power to abuse others. You can't just be a person who seeks to understand. You can't just be a journalist asking generic questions. You have to put yourself in a place where you're somebody who's given a lot of power, and slowly you start to abuse that power. And what does that person become? Who are you? I have to plug myself into those moments in my life in the past where I've been angry at something, and where I've been cruel because I was angry in little ways. But then you magnify them on scale, and I have to go there
That's very human. And then I have to look at another person from across the table from me, and I understand, well, you're there too. And then you had more opportunity to do truly cool things. And and then um, and then where again I have to plug myself into places where I've been. Okay, imagine I can go where I was cruel to others and was unaware of it. So I was in a mind space where I was thinking I'm doing good and I was doing not good. Again, I've never gotten the opportunity to do any of those things at a large scale, but all of us have done it at a small scale. And I plug myself into that, and then we're here, or two, if it's somebody who's in prison, if it's somebody who's a dictator, we're in that space where evil is all of us have the capacity to do that evil, and I have to imagine myself being able to do that evil. And then we're here together in that dark, dark place. And then if it's just right, something real can actually come. Something from that person's childhood, maybe awakening to realization that I thought I was a good person, that I'm not. And but that only happens when you truly empathize. Those moments of discovery are beautiful, but they also happen in science. We just have a conversation, and you realize, I feel like talking to Stephen Wolfram, I feel like we constantly realize beautiful things together on this element of evil and sociopathy. That Jung had this notion that we have all things inside us, and that we all have the capacity to be good or evil, etc. But that I have the good fortune of working with somebody who has deep understanding of psychiatry, but also psychoanalysis and theory. And he said to me recently, he said, whether all people have all things inside them is still debated in the psychology community and in the neuroscience community, and as a matter of philosophy. But there are certain people, not many, but there are certain people who they've actually lived out many versions of their possible selves in the first person. And so those are unique individuals. And even if they tapped into these things as you mentioned, at a minor level, as opposed to impacting people negatively at a scale. So being able to access those different parts of themselves is key, and you've been willing to step into that. My podcast is not one in which we get down to those matters. But yes, you never know. We might do an episode on narcissism and sociopathy. The other thing that I took away from a conversation with a friend who's a lot of years in special operations and the intelligence community said, it's if you look at somebody's past, at some point you will come to understand some pretty good reasons as to why they became who they are. But you have to draw the red line someplace. And what he was referring to was the fact that certain people, at least in the eyes of certain communities, deserve to be eliminated as a consequence of their actions, right? Regardless of what drove them to those actions. So it gets right down to the line between nature, nurture, neuroscience, and the law and justice. Complicated beings. I can think of a number of people that I would love to hear you interview. And here I'm not revealing reasons why, but except for the fact that I think he would be uniquely suited to bring out the important components of the conversation that other people have not been able to do, which, for instance, Liz Holmes. This is one of the most mysterious and yet disliked people on the planet. She's sort of synonymous with deception. I don't know if there have been any real interviews of her since the whole thing. I haven't followed that case. I listened to the book, and I followed it a little bit because it was happening in my hometown. Right, Theranos was right up the road. The building's still there. It's interesting. It's some of the most premier real estate in Silicon Valley, but nobody wants it. And so, it's very hard to sell a home where somebody committed suicide or committed a murder, even a beautiful home. There's no like the Theranos is that building. So that would be a really interesting interview. I would love to hear them. One of the most interesting dark human beings in science. Yeah, and then there will be people that say, was it even science, right? It might have all been deception. It might have been one part deception, one part goal setting mixed in with clearly that there were so many factors impacting what happened. I think the big difference between Theranos and that story and some of the other stories about Silicon Valley where people promised a lot more than they could deliver they were promising things that were directly related to health and healthcare. People were taking blood tests with the understanding that the data they were getting was important information about sexually transmitted diseases and other diseases, and making real-world decisions on the basis of that. Guys, if you remember when the iPhone first came out and Steve Jobs was still alive, and the phones were dropping calls if you held it in a particular way, and his response was a little flip. He said, "Hey, folks, it's a phone," as if like don't get so worked up. But people held it, understanding it to a very high standard. She would sort of, it seemed, and I don't know, it seemed like she sort of adopted this idea that you could get it wrong a bunch of times before you get it right. Except if the allegations are true, and I think she was found guilty, I believe, that a number of the things that they were doing were impacting real world decisions. So Steve's point about the phone is just the phone. Well, it depends on the call. If you're calling 911, it's not just the phone, right? But in the case of blood tests and disease, that's serious. I think that the Theranos case was super interesting because the number of people from major universities and from government that both trusted her and the number of people who did not trust her and yet either didn't speak up or won't listen to them. It was only in the forensic version of it that everyone said, "Oh yeah, I knew that she was lying, et cetera, et cetera." They were lying. So multiple people involved in those lies. But I have a deep interest in the neuroscience of narcissism, sociopathy, and some of the darker aspects of the mind. So yeah, maybe someday. Well, maybe we'll do a podcast together. Yeah, I mean, like in the kind of early '90s version of talk shows where we do the lights. Yeah, we do it together. You can use your voice because your voice is much more sinister sounding than mine.
Good cop, bad cop. Well, it'd be interesting from a scientific perspective, somebody who is a sociopath or a psychopath, how to reveal something real about them. I think that requires not just, well, I don't know what that requires. That requires the same skill that it takes to be a good therapist.
Right, and some therapists won't work with sociopaths because they don't feel any progress can be made. Some therapists will work with sociopaths because for the wealthy ones they often they want their money. I think most therapists are good and benevolent, but there's some that will do it just the same way lawyers will work with criminals when they're criminals, right? Because they're criminals. There are certain domains of psychiatry that are more tractable than others, right? Lines are interesting, I should just mention, because we have this phenomenon of splitting. So in psychology, the idea is that being neurotic is actually the goal. The idea that you could be, feel something and work a lot to overcome it, or have some sort of defense mechanism in place, but that's not destructive. That's actually a pretty healthy state to be in. It's provided it's not destructive. Psychotic is truly delusional thinking about reality, and the idea is that borderlines split, intermittently split between psychotic and neurotic. That's why it's called. This beautiful work by Melanie Klein that describes this, which I'm just now kind of delving into. But so the borderline is the person who's like, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and then truly feels as if they hate you, and you become the bad object. Borderlines are because of the splitting, right? Schizophrenics are challenged because of the detachment from reality, and narcissists are challenging because they're often so charming that even the therapists are charming.
I believe you mentioned Carl Dezarov. We'll talk
He's
about
definitely not a narcissist. He's one of the more humble people, but he is brilliant.
Thanks again to you. You connected us. I had the pleasure of having a conversation with him. You had a conversation with him. I really enjoyed it on the podcast. You guys come from the same size, from the same place, maybe different journeys. Fascinating.
And levels. We were postdocs together. Carl is truly the Michael Jordan of Wayne Gretzky. 5 children, amazing marriage to it. Also an amazing scientist. His wife, Michelle Monge's in our neurology department at Stanford. Incredible thinker, writer, very kind person, humble. Speaking of getting into state, sorry, Carl, I'm going to out you on this, but Carl, despite being at the highest levels of science and engineering and the practice of psychiatry, his office is literally a coat closet with a small table. When you meet with Carl, if you manage to meet with him, because it's very hard to get to, you walk in, you sit down as if you're going through some interrogation, some spy novel, and he'll ask you, what are you most excited about lately? And I've got 11 minutes or something. And that's a meeting call because he's that busy. But he doesn't have the office with the pictures of the kids and the thing and all that. All that is kept elsewhere. So in order to I asked him why he worked in this office, right? You work on light and channels of light, things related to light, all things. Here you are in this dark place. Well, this is what gets me into the state of mind, be able to do what I want to do. Very Rick Rubin-ish. Not at all the same person, but very similar in that he's figured out the physical space he needs in order to get the optimal state to do the work he needs to do in this lifetime. And it's very unusual, right? If I don't have a window, I kind of freak out. I can do it here for a while. We're in this black cube here, floating in space, of course. But I find that amazing that these people that are operating at this super high level are willing to actually deprive themselves of a lot of conditions. They're not sitting there with the secretary coming in offering them espresso every 5 minutes. No. That's New York neuroscience. The New York neuroscience mafia is kind of famous for having all the tickets to the opera and this and that, and they enjoy lifestyle. The New York neuroscience. Oh, there is one. There definitely is one. They know who they are. They know who they are.
For people who don't know, Andrew Huberman is from the West Coast, and now he's starting wars with the neuroscience mafia.
Well, they do amazing science. They love their lifestyle, and that's wonderful. But the culture is very different. Carl and I think Silicon Valley in general kind of prides itself on this kind of monk-like asceticism, right?
So at the individual scale, deliberate about controlling the environment. I think about that with conversations too. I haven't been deliberate about that either. In terms of controlling the space you're in. Visually, yes, black curtains, all those kinds of things.
There's nothing like the Lex Friedman podcast studio. First of all, when you do them remotely, I always feel like I'm in a witness relocation. Okay, you only get the coordinates at the last moment, and you always get the sense that there are people behind the walls that are recording things.
Well, there's something about creating a feeling. I have a sense that there's a robot up there. There's several throughout this place, and I think part of creating a feeling would be having the robots constantly moving around and having a mind of their own, because that would most closely put guests and other humans that I interact with into a place that's closest to my mind, because it's such an engineering mind. It's one where things come to life, and whatever that is, that could be like art, it could be robots, or art. So I'm thinking about that both for me and for guests. And I'm also thinking about the difficult guests, just to return to what Elizabeth Holmes was thinking. One person, maybe a couple of things that he says. One person I think I would like to talk to is Ghislaine Maxwell.
I always get afraid right before you reveal these kinds of things, and now I know why I get afraid. Yeah, I mean, again, assuming that she did this that people claim she did, they're despicable, right? I mean, these were underage children, right? There's just no version of the story where she did the things she was accused of doing and is still a quote-unquote good person. There's just, in my mind, right? And yet, I think there is tremendous interest in understanding that her to do all that. So at least for some people.
Let me say a couple of things. So one is, at a high level, let me say that she believes, or her current story is that she's the victim of Jeffrey Epstein. I think I'll just leave that there. So these are ideas that you face. The nature of truth and the nature of the human mind is what it is. And this is, imagine, folks, if you went into a room, the person that says that, what do you do next? Let me also say that I never, or rarely, I rarely mention names that I'm interested in talking to without having made significant progress in already securing that interview. So people sometimes ask me about Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. I do not bring them up lightly in terms of there being a path to action conversation. That said, something I regret, but I'm not sure I know what to do with it. But in the case of all the people I just mentioned, I haven't been preparing for those conversations. I only start really preparing seriously when it's confirmed because it's such a heavy burden. And one of the things I regret having mentioned a conversation with Vladimir Putin before the war in Ukraine broke out over the last few years is that I would mention it very loosely, very casually, and without having really deeply put myself into a place that I'm ready to talk to. And that's a tricky thing because then the internet, the audience in general, and just me, when I listen back to my dumb self, think, well, why are you speaking so lightly about these topics?
Well, I know you've had a long-standing interest in talking to him. I think now, I don't understand how I would sit down and have a conversation with somebody like that, but that's not in the range of my skill sets, right?
Or like maybe not in the range of things that you're drawn to somehow.
Not so much. I mean, I would watch that episode with great interest. Well, you did an episode recently with this guy who was a former cyber criminal turned stateside, right? I think he's recovered now. And there was a segment in there. Remind me his name?
Brett Johnson.
There was a segment in there where he talked about stealing a lifetime's worth of collected coins from some elderly woman, and this was everything she had. And then he openly admitted that he felt no remorse, which is the way he described it, is purely sociopathic. And then, of course, we learned that he grew up in a family where criminal behavior was very common. It was kind of embedded into his notions of what typical behaviors were. And I found myself somewhat conflicted, but also hung up on this idea that he was, he had behaved as a sociopath, in a sociopathic way. It created an internal conflict because he's a quite charming guest and his stories are terrific. Especially, I really enjoyed the discussions about how he would go out and do all these things out of a desire to please his girlfriend. So he was in service to other people despite being sociopath. You could say he was in service to them as a way to extract. It's very complicated. I think that's the reason I went into science, is that at some level, it's more about facts than it is opinions and judgments. And I don't know that I have the ability to suspend judgment away from the kind of top level contours of my initial reactions were like, if it's true, like the Ghislaine Maxwell's and the Liz Holmes and the other sociopaths, is one of just kind of revulsion and repulsion. But that could also reflect the fact that I'm not as neurologically sophisticated as somebody that can spin all the plates of empathy, forgiveness, but also holding people accountable at the same time. That's work. That takes, if you think about it, that's 3 forebrain circuits having to work in parallel. That's the difference between chess or a game of Go and a game of
No, so one is actually holding in your mind, and 2 is the raw skill of conversation. You're very good conversation, but the skill of conversation is really tricky. I'm not being something. I'm being just objective. I'm not good at conversation. I'm working very hard at getting better at it. I'm speaking not about just podcasting. I'm speaking just on the life. I have anxiety from social interaction.
Do you really?
A huge amount.
So this is interesting because I never detect it, ever. And I think there are people that we both know that have said to me that they too feel anxious, and yet your voice is steady. I don't see any perspiration. You appear incredibly
shitless. I was scared shitless with Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin is, when you first meet him, is intimidatingly calm. But as you get to know him a bit, you realize that the kindness and the generosity that you sense is real. But yeah, I would never in a million years have guessed that you get anxious in conversation.
Can I just make another quick comment. This may come off entertaining to you. Maybe you've already gotten the same. But having mentioned Vladimir Putin, Vladimir Zelensky, Ghislaine Maxwell, there is a natural question. How does Lex have access to this? Who does he work for? Like, how is he, like,
Who works for him?
or who works for him? Right? What does he have on others? I ask myself, when I look in the mirror, just somebody who kind of enjoys conspiracy theories, I want to ask the same question. Like, well, I usually ask in the following way, like, how the fuck am I so lucky? Like, who am I a robot being controlled by somebody else? Like, how is this my life right now? What is happening? It really does feel like a simulation. So let me just speak to several things. First of all, I have no boss. I know of, nor am I controlled by any intelligence agencies of any nation. We're gonna get you a dog. I can talk to. I'm scared of getting a dog so far so deep in it.
Next time I'll bring it. I'm just gonna bring it home. And
then you'll never see me again today. I love dogs so much. But I was also surprised maybe. I have never talked to an intelligence, which is very interesting to me. Like
that you're aware of, because they're very good at communicating.
Right, but I've been very suspicious on this exact point. That's the downside of kind of being an introvert, having anxiety about social interaction, but then having so much love thrown your way because you connect over podcasts. Podcasts have a powerful way of connecting people to people love that I really love, I appreciate, but I wonder, like, exactly this question, like why is this person with a Russian accent talking to me and showing me so much love?
Well, because sorry to interrupt you again, but it's what we do, and it's a sign of interest. Sometimes, yeah, I have a colleague at Stanford, and she said, interruption, 75% of the time is a sign of real interest in what the person is saying, if nothing else. Well, you're very lovely.
Well,
but I learned about hedgehog in the fog. When I learned, you're very lovely. People love you because you're lovely.
I love love. Okay, so 100%, and it's here in Austin, Texas. People are so amazing. I go just hugs and just I love people.
But do you want a family? Are you eventually
100%? I mean, I take what you said as a challenge in terms of having a family with kids, and they do jiu-jitsu and obviously defeat you and make you miserable for your failures as a father because you couldn't.
But you're gonna be a great thing.
Build up an army of good people. But yes, I would love a family. I would love to have children. But I just want to finish that point. I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about the way people perceive. What you're seeing is a Forrest Gump type character. Like who I am, I seem to be. This is how like the world seems to work. Is you just try to be yourself. Like you try to find yourself. Maybe the better way to say it, and just be that. Be kind to people. Work your ass off, and say F you to anybody that wants to control you or to tell you what to do. Just be free and then put love out there in the world and doors open. This karma thing seems to work. It's like how the hell, my friends and you know, how the hell did I get a chance to eat barbecue with Rick Rubin, right? Like doors.
You guys have barbecue.
Right.
And he's from New York. Any New Yorker that I know has very high standards. Bad restaurants don't last long in New York.
And barbecue counts as Texas barbecue.
Well, I would also add that whether or not you realize it or not, you took tremendous risk. And we come from the same original community, which is academic science. And to be at MIT and to start posting lectures online is risky, right? I was third or fourth man in terms of podcasting as an academic. you had gone on Rogan many times, and Claire had gone on there. Especially before the pandemic, you just didn't see many academics and scientists talking in a public-facing way. So you took tremendous risk, right? You took tremendous risk always wearing that jacket and tie, right? The only time I haven't seen you in that truly is when we World Jiu-Jitsu, which is, and here I'm being generous to myself saying it, World Jiu-Jitsu basically choked me out in front of 100 cells. It was great fun, and I have been doing that to have a beginner's mind. I have admitted I have not been taking the classes, but I'm going to. I truly am. Especially there's a small chance I might find myself in Austin more often in the near future. But
if you're on in San Francisco, you should train with Mark Zuckerberg. He just started. So,
yeah,
you guys get.
Sure.
I mean, he's actually, so people listen to an episode, perhaps he's a fascinating human being.
Listen, you took tremendous risk as an academic to do what you did. So I do believe that when one takes intelligent risk, because you can die, you can crash your career, you can do all sorts of self-destructive or destructive things when you take risks. You took risks and they paid off, right? And you take different risks at different stages, but I don't throw around the word admiration lightly. I mean, I admire that you were in this class with my team. Like, I'm going to film this and put it online. One of your early interviews is with Ido Portal, who's very hard to get to. I've communicated with Ido a few times.
You should definitely talk to him.
I can't wait to talk to him. I'm dying to talk to him. I was supposed to do some course teaching with him right before the pandemic hit, and then it got canceled because we couldn't travel. But getting to him is exceedingly challenging. So you do have this incredible ability to get to people and for them to trust you and know you. And I think it's through your authenticity. And I think it's the fact that you're willing to go places where people haven't been before. You know, this is what's the saying about the pioneers? How do you spot the pioneers? They're the people with the arrows in their backs. You know, so that's the, you know, yeah, and that's actually a quote that I lifted from Terry Stepnowski. So, there you go. You know, I need sources again. But Terry's you should talk to Terry. He's a computational neuroscientist down at the Salk Institute, house investigator. But so, you know, taking risks that other people have not taken that's a real thing, and to do it with integrity and rigor, that's a real thing. And so, yeah, I'm complimenting you, and I hope it lands deeply. But I also hope that people hear that and understand that it's one thing to do what other people are already doing. Another thing to launch an entire art form or venue, and you did that. And you didn't write a book. Hopefully you will someday. You didn't go write a book. A lot of academics have written books. You went online. Jordan Peterson, another controversial film. He did it too. All those lectures that he did, and then he led to this other thing. So, you know, there's karma, and then there's also having the spine to just put it all on the line and do something for which there is no prior example to hold on to while you go through those headwinds.
The really fascinating thing that actually a lot of people tell me about you, Andrew Hewitt, like the reach of a podcast is really fascinating. It's not the numbers of people that listen. I don't know if that's important at all. What's important is like the depth of connection you have with certain people. It really moves them, and like they really get you. There's a lot of big Andrew Huberman fans that really get you. It's not just the science, it's the stuff between the lines. It's Costello. It's the whole picture of the scientist that finds beauty in biology and reveals it. And they love you for it. You know, because it was on television at the time, I followed that Amanda Knox story pretty carefully. And I don't watch television, but whenever I would travel to TV and the airplane, I would find myself getting wrapped into things like Locked Up Abroad. And these things where they make you terrified to travel anywhere, let alone commit a crime overseas. You know, the scenes of some of these prisons are so dramatic. You know, I mean, her case got a ton of interest, and then she went and then was a student at the University of Washington, and has talked quite openly about how she was treated and how people assume guilt, and eventually she was exonerated, and we can only go by what we know, but the law determined. But these are people that the world is fascinated by. I'm
I'm guessing about a third of people have already decided this person is despicable. Why would you ever give them an audience? About a third of people, I think, are open to, or at least interested in learning more about them. And then I think the remaining third, kind of the third that the category that I put myself in, which is what can I learn about people and myself, even in my revulsion, right? What can I learn? What can I learn about myself from listening to this conversation with somebody that I like to think, I'm not talking about Amanda here, I'm talking about the other people you're talking about, that I can't relate to, right? Hearing conversations with and about people that you cannot relate to is informative. Otherwise, your whole mind literally becomes instant.
Well, there's an interesting thing I also had to, ever since the war in Ukraine broke out, one of the questions I was asking myself, and this is not to be dramatic, it's just a very simple, honest question that I think a lot of journalists that operate in the war zone or documentary filmmakers that I've recently got a chance to meet have to be honest with themselves. Are you willing to put at risk your life for things you do?
And what are you willing to die for?
Yeah, what are you willing to die for? It sounds very dramatic, but whenever risk goes up, I mean, I don't know. You asked that if you want to take out a trip out to space on a commercial space flight, you have to. Are you willing? Are you willing to die for this journey? Now the odds there are really small.
I just watched Apollo 13 again. Great movie. I'm not going to space. I'm not going to space.
Afraid of heights?
No, I'm not afraid of heights. It feels like a terrible place to die.
Well, first of all, death anywhere is not great.
Yeah, although I have a song teed up in my phone. If the plane starts to go down,
yeah,
I'm gonna spend the last. It's a rare song. Nobody knows it. It's a song off a B track of my favorite band, which is Rancid. It's called "The Sentence," and nobody. And I love it, and I listen to it almost every day.
The sentence is called.
The band is called Rancid. I really love those guys. Love their music. And the song is "The Sentence." You can only find it on a B-side or outtake. If you don't know how to decipher Tim Armstrong's voice, then you probably won't understand the lyrics. But because it sounds very, very fast. But if the plane ever goes, anytime there's turbulence, I put that headphones in. I'm like, well, it's time. I'm gonna go out like this. I don't want to drift off into the galaxy to smoke this asphyxiate. That sounds hard. Just like I wouldn't want to drown.
But on the plane is okay.
Well, on a plane, if the thing starts going down and there's truly nothing you can do, you might as well at least listen to your favorite song.
Yeah, true. I'll probably go with the Pixies Lose My Mind, like Fight Club. And just the calmness, just sit back, like the musicians playing with the Titanic.
I didn't know you were a Pixies fan. I'm gonna have to.
Not so much a Pixies fan, actually. I should say, but that was the "Where's My Mind" was his chosen song for Fight Club. At the end, when the buildings are coming down or something like that, so that there's certain songs that just right for the collapse of human civilization, and you're calmly appreciating that's just it. This is how absurd this life is. At any moment it can end, and this is it.
I love how we both have Death and Demise soundtracks.
It's just a question when you're an academic, it doesn't come up often.
Right.
That's all. That's
yeah. There are some academics that are bold and brave. It's not a phenotype. Being bold and brave in the physical world is not a common phenotype. And the great neurologist, one of my, I don't have many heroes, but Oliver Sacks is a true hero. I mean, people think of him as a writer, but he was foremost a neurologist, and he took tremendous pushback from the neurology community for doing his books and his articles. He has a great biography called On the Move. There's a wonderful documentary that just came out about him. He died in 2015. I'm actually kind of a collector of his things. But he was accused of horrible things until the movie Awakenings came out with De Niro and Robin Williams.
Amazing movie, by the way. People don't. It seems not say great things about the movie.
Amazing, and it was only once he became famous from that movie that his more academic work started to receive any kind of attention. mentioned, and he was invited back to Columbia and NYU. Yeah, the New York Neuroscience Mafia is a real thing. And yes, you know who you are, and some of them are actually coming on the podcast. They are.
You're not. I think we talked offline about this. We should start a mafia to fight off whatever's going on at the East Coast. Although I'm still at MIT, so I don't know how that works. Boston is different than New York.
Yeah, so I have tremendous respect for science done in New York. Don't get me wrong; they are excellent scientists. It's just a very different culture than on the West Coast. And the personality,
Tremendous respect for the mob.
Well, and the personalities are a bit more grandiose. However, because of some of the shift in science culture in the last few years, things around scandals and things of that sort, they've been forced to tamp down some of their personality, or at least their outspoken personality. And I actually think it's revealed something really important and useful in science, which is, it used to be the case that you could really inject personality into it. Richard Feynman's a good example. If he did today what he did then, bongo drumming on the Caltech naked, working out theorems in strip clubs and things like that, he would have lost his job in moments, right? So that kind of behavior isn't celebrated anymore. It's actually punished. And I'm only half kidding about this New York Neuroscience Mafia, but because I now exist in multiple realms, I can say these sorts of things. And again, admiration and respect, but I will say that I think it's important that people in science, kids that are curious about science, understand that you can have any personality, provided that you're ethical and respectful in science, and do well, right? There are true bench that just want to be at the bench. There are people that just want to be in an office. There are people that really enjoy public speaking. And there are people that love meetings, and there are people that hate crowds. And so there's a place for everybody, truly a place for everybody in science. I would like to be able to shine light on the fact that you can have a shy personality, an outgoing personality, and all of those can have excellent careers in science. But you have to find the community in place that's right for you. One reason I like Stanford is that Stanford is very much about the future. We have Nobel Prize winners, we have field medal winners, and all that stuff. And their names are on walls, and we acknowledge their great works. But most of what you hear about in the halls of Stanford is about what's happening now and what could happen next. It's really about the future. Whereas when I spend time at other institutions, not to be named, you hear that, but there's a lot of kind of recycling and regurgitation of how wonderful people are based on things they did previously. And the students at Stanford, because of Silicon Valley, sure, they have respect for Nobel Prizes. They're delighted to be learning from and surrounded by all these great minds. But they're mostly interested in what they are going to create. And so I I really like the shift toward possibility as opposed to things that are steeped in tradition. I've never been to high table dinner at Oxford. I'm sure it's a wonderful experience. Also, I'm not sure what purpose it serves for the world, but I've never been, and so I don't know what the conversations are, and so maybe I'm speaking out of line. And then now I'm definitely not getting invited.
You're definitely getting invited. Yeah, I'm with you that the cultures pick the right one for you. That's why I like MIT, the spirit of it. To me, it's not about the past or the future. It's about just tinkering and having fun building cool stuff. Like the big ambitious projects is there. I mean, maybe more than the biology outside, but like the engineering side, it doesn't matter if this has an impact. Let us build the coolest thing the world has ever built.
Whenever I'm in Kendall Square, I've seen they have those buildings there that actually tilt toward the ground. So the architecture of MIT is also impressive.
Yeah, he pulled up, Sergey just pulled up Elon Musk to me. I'm inspired by curiosity. That is what drives me. Let us expand the scope and scale of consciousness so that we may aspire to understand the universe. Those like 3 tweets in one, but curiosity, curiosity for its own sake.
What's that saying? I think Dorothy Parker said, the cure for boredom is curiosity. There's no cure for curiosity.
And you need to celebrate. So let me just briefly mention to my lovely friends at MIT to celebrate different weirdness, to celebrate weird characters. I sometimes get loving pressure from my lovely friends at MIT to tone down the weirdness a bit.
Really? Even from MIT?
I'm very fortunate to have a lot of leverage to where I have completely resist the pressure. But I'm very sure that there's young faculty that subtle pressure would um,
Dissolve them into a plan.
not no.
Oh, they're from Boston. Excuse me.
From Boston. That's right.
They're tougher than that.
That's right. But it's a slight nudging towards conformity that I think ultimately destroys, um, or at least lessens the power of kind of science that you can do when you encourage diversity. Diversity in all of its forms, including the weirdness of ideas, the out-of-the-box thinkers, including the flamboyant behavior online. Uh, how you choose to educate, how you choose to inspire. People talk about freedom of speech, but it's not just like freedom of speech to say controversial things. It's also freedom of speech to be weird. Like, if you're for some reason fascinated in, like, you look at Elon Musk, he talks about sex a lot. Let the guy put sex memes up. Who cares? Like,
I mean, I feel like Elon can do basically whatever he wants.
right?
There's no pressure.
But there's a bunch of Elons in the academic world. There's a bunch of Elon. No, actually, sorry. Let me backtrack. The man deserves props.
Right? He's unparalleled.
He's the CEO of major companies. You better believe there's pressure to behave more like a CEO as opposed to a giggling school boy who's posting memes throughout the night. But that is him, and that freedom is what freedom looks like. I talked to a lot of CEOs, and a lot of them feel like caged birds who have long ago forgotten how to sing. Quite honestly, like they there's like shareholders, and they come up with excuses for themselves. Here's why I have to be this way. You have to understand. So on. There's PR. There's marketing people. There's lawyers. It's all that kind of stuff. But the final result is the authenticity is suffocated. The beautiful weirdness of a CEO, of a leader, of a creator, of a scientist, all that. That's all. That's all gone.
Well, Steve Jobs would have kept his job and acting the way he did in his 20s and 30s in today's time. But he probably would have updated his protocols, so to
A little
speak.
bit, but maybe
Screaming at employees. I mean, these are anecdotes, right? I call them anecdata because people treat them as data, but they're really just anecdotes. We don't know. I wasn't there. But I like the idea of authenticity without oversharing. Right? You're very authentic, but there are aspects to your life that I'm aware of that your audiences will never be aware of, and there are aspects of your life that I'll never be aware of. And so you're still authentic.
But yeah, which ones are you aware of? People are gonna wonder, like, what is
you think I'm
a
gonna
sex dungeon? What is this?
but interesting choice of examples. No, but I think that people lose careers on the basis of the movement of thumbs, right? I mean, the chair of psychiatry at Columbia recently lost his position based on a response to a tweet. This is one of the most famous psychiatry departments in the world, and he put something out there that was very insensitive, frankly. And everyone that I talked about it was like, gosh, that was very, very insensitive, not thoughtful at all, and he lost his job, right? Or at least had to step down. I don't know the specifics. So, I think I read someplace that more than half of the job loss due to online behaviors because people were trying to be funny, right? I mean, not everyone can pull off what Tim Dillon. Oh, and by the way, congratulations! I think that you and Tim just got married. Yes.
No, we didn't just get married. He proposed.
Yeah, got it.
And I said yes.
Right. So some people can get away. Oh yeah,
Thank you, sir. It has that.
He has 13,300 likes. One of those is.
So for people who are not aware, one of the days in April tweeted that Tim Dillon asked me to get married, and I said yes. I think Tim said that the wedding will be on 6th Street in Austin. Bring all of your weapons, which of course is totally inappropriate. I was 20. I was like you know, the wedding from November Rain. One of Mr. and Mrs.
Oh wow!
Oh, Mr. Mister, I called it.
Wow, yeah, you broke tradition with the jacket plate. So it sounds to me that you are a free speech absolutist.
I think freedom is really important. That includes letting people who are hateful, letting people who are controversial have a voice on platforms. But it becomes, I'm not sure what exactly to think. I treasure the quiet voices in the back of the room. And sometimes the assholes silence voices, meaning by being loud and obnoxious and so on, it pushes away the thought of people. So I'm also a fan of creating communities. Like if you want to let people kind of build a community positive that's loving, or that's constantly trolling, or that's super hateful. All those communities should have us in the world, but like the thing I've noticed is hate can destroy a community full of hate can destroy a community full of love easier than a community full of love can overtake one with hate. So you have to kind of, I don't know exactly how, but create digital mechanisms that discourage the collision of these communities. They should all have a platform and ability to speak to a large audience, but you have to be careful to protect that like little flame of connection that people have.
That's good. The goodness sounds like. I mean, yeah, I think you know, in any great city like New York, which I love, by the way, you want to have a symphony and an opera house, and you want some punk rock shows happening on the Lower East Side. You just don't necessarily want to overlap. In terms of social media, you know, and podcasts and engagement, one thing that I decided very early on is with to encourage comments and feedback, etc. But I have in my mind what I call classroom rules. You've taught in the university, and then you teach in the university, and there's certain you establish a certain etiquette within the classroom of the kinds of questions. Right? So there's always the student that's going to ask a question, which is basically a 10-minute monologue about their experience that really isn't a question that pertains to a lot of people. So you politely discourage that kind of question, and you encourage the kinds of questions that are likely to be in the minds of many of their students. It's just more efficient that way.
Or not politely.
Or, you know, I try and respond to comments, and I try and respond, but also, you know, there's this really interesting question now. If you block people or restrict people, people think that you're somehow afraid of the information that they're posting, but that's often not the case. I'm not in the habit of blocking or restricting too many people. Occasionally, we've had to do it only because of how other people are being treated. What I can take and what I think other people deserve to take are two completely different things. David Goggins, right? Who know well. I don't know if he still does this, but a few years ago he posted something like, if people ask him, when do you sleep, he would just block them. Because it wasn't consistent with what he was trying to say, of course, but he's trying to get a message out. I think people should just understand that everybody's page is their own to monitor, right? Just like in a classroom, there are certain rules, of course, of institution, but then you establish the etiquette within the context of the kind of class. You know, a class about personality psychology or the psychology of love, you're going to have a very different range of conversations than you know, a class on you know, mental health physiology. So I think social media is a great place for conversation, but it's not necessarily.
Yeah, and I also just say that people that do get blocked, I know it's something I do very deliberately, blocked or ignored. I actually explicitly think if there's somebody that sings about me or whatever, I always think positive thoughts. Kind of weird, guru thing, but just actually found that as a hack. I think well of them, and that allows me to never think of them again. Like I send them my love, and like I think this is a human being with a fascinating story. I would love to have time to actually learn about their story. There's not enough time in the world. Well of them, and then I'm going to enjoy a delicious meal, a piece of me, and I love. So it's just and move on, and then never adding to the negativity of like, just even in the privacy of my own mind, thinking a hateful thought towards
serves no purpose. So I love that about you, and I think what you just said to be true. One of the, I think, more toxic things in life is what's called evacuative projection. When people feel something and they're trying to evacuate it and project it onto something else. Projection is fascinating, right? What you essentially just said is that you don't accept projections. In fact, you transmute them, to put in the language of the Buddhists. You transmute it into positivity, and then that way you truly neutralize it and transmute it. I think that if people were better understood when they were experiencing or observing evacuative projection, the world would be healthier. But it requires a certain stable internal rudder, and when we're tired or sick or angry, or hungry, excessively hungry, all of us are less good at it. I've been positively struck by the nature of this with the interactions, not just feedback, but my favorite thing as an educator in the classroom, but also on social media, my absolute favorite thing is when the comments about other people's group are positively reinforcing. So you see people having conversations within the comments, and you realize this is like if you, as an educator, then teach. It's funny to talk to the students, but the real pleasure is walking by a small group of students on campus and hearing them talking about the material. That just fills me with joy, and because what it means is that the ideas are reverberating in their nervous systems and will eventually make out to others. So it's not just about feedback; it's about a venue for parsing information.
So you actually posted that we're going to talk on Instagram, and I collected a bunch of questions, which reminds me of I have to mention Mike Jones and a question he asked, but also he gave quite a while ago, if it's okay. But first, yes, we're looking at an Instagram page of Mike Jones. Check it out. He and from him that is a badass, which in that yours is the earth. ... Some if by electric complaint.
The story of this life is kind of interesting, perhaps, for people where I was coming out here to Austin with Lex, and it was his birthday. I wanted to get him a gift, but I didn't know what to get him. And I contacted this guy, that I learned about from Joe Rogan. Because remember in the old days of Joe Rogan, when you go on the episode afterwards, you take a picture with an object. So it's like Elon with a flamethrower, or people that have gas. I picked up this bushwhacker hatchet thing, and I love this thing. And Joe said, "Oh yeah, you should check out Mike Jones's work. He does these beautiful knives." So then I heard your episode with Joe, and you recited a poem at the end. It was right after your grandma died, and there's a line in that poem from If that Mike engraved on that knife for you. So he makes these by hand. I love that. The old days. Before the podcast,
That's your first appearance.
that was the first time on there, and a lot of fun. In the old studio in Los Angeles, and Mike makes these beautiful knives, and I just have a great admiration for crafts people. So, do you use it? Do you cut your one meal a day steaks?
I feel
Be taking it with you on your travels.
exactly. I actually used to keep it on the table, but I thought it really intimidated guests. But like,
You put it on their side.
yeah,
Right.
it's like oops.
It's trust. Right?
What's the story? I mean, yeah, it's not. It's quite badass, let me say. But the craftsmanship is obvious, but also
It's got some like texture.
yeah.
It looks like it's designed to cleave through.
If I had like a family or something where people, there's nothing about this place that softens your kind of person might not murder.
Let's put it differently. This could use a nice touch. That's one way to put it.
If it's okay, let me, because it is a poem I go often actually. You mentioned reciting some lyrics. We'll come back to that at some point. You did a few songs that touch you. But this is one of the things I go to often. I'll read it to remind myself. It's advice from father to son, and it's a kind of mantra that it's just nice to live by. So it's killing me. Just use this opportunity one more time. Read it by Rothschild. If you can keep your head with all about you, losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by reading, being lied about, don't deal in lies, but don't give way to hate, and yet look too good, don't talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster, and treat those two imposters just the same. If you can bear to hear the truth you spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch with him gave you a life too broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. If you can make one heap with one woodings, and risk it all on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose, start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart to continue to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on, and there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, and walk with kings and lose the common touch, the foes and the loving friends can hurt you. All men count with you, but none too much. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mike. That's it.
And engraved in it. Yeah, it's,
Yours is the earth and everything that's in it.
We toil over what to engrave, and then finally I just said, Mike, just pick something that speaks to you. You're the piece of that.
There's certain ways to put it aside. Carl Deister on TV, vertical projection. One of my favorite, first of all, just as you said, incredible. I mean, if you wrote fiction, if you wrote those kinds of things, where he goes, right? Very interesting. I think that book took 10 years, which is vindication for me and for you, because we both books. I haven't done it. Yeah, I mean, in some sense, your first book will have, decades of it, right? Even if you just take half a year to write it. It's like the first book, like the first album for a musician. I mean, it's a life, it's a journey. So he uses poems and quotes and that well. It's a beautiful book. It's a dreamy book. I think when people hear that it's a book about neuroscience, they think they're going to get a textbook or a protocols book or something. It's nothing like that. But it really is a deep dive into the mind of the psychiatrist and the researcher. So much feeling and compassion. I love that you love poetry. I didn't know that until I saw you on the road with Read If. And I'm a very rabid consumer of poetry, but I'm a big Wendell Berry fan. And I try and read a poem once every few days. Also, I think If is a tough act to follow. Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the richness and I think, like you said, every third line in there is something that you consider your life well lived if you said that.
What about the preparation for the solo podcast? You said you listen to certain songs. You sing or recite lyrics to certain songs. Is there ones that kind of come to mind that are interesting?
Yeah, I've always been very lyrics driven, and I don't understand music. I talked to Rick about this. I'm going to talk to you about this a little bit. I don't really understand. I mean, I can hear music and like it, but I don't really understand the structure of it. The lyrics make a lot of sense.
But does it touch your soul, music, or is it the lyrics?
It's the lyrics. So I'm a huge Joe Strummer fan, and I'm going to lose points for saying this, but I'm not a Clash fan. Oh, he obviously is best known for the Clash. Most Clash songs start off great, and then after about 30 seconds, at least in my mind, just kind of disintegrate into a bunch of mush. Whereas Joe Strummer in the Mescalero, which is what he did as an adult, as later, and some of his solo work. He actually Rick produced some work that he did with Johnny Cash. Rick pulled Johnny Cash out of retirement and had to do his albums before. And so anything that Strummer did, there's a favorite song of mine by Strummer. It's called Burning Lights. You can find it. There is an album now where you can find it for Tennessee Rain or some of these things that he did, which are a little bit more folky. So not really love that song. A bunch of songs by Rancid that I love. And then if I listen to instrumentals, I do. I'll listen to classical piano.
Some dreams are made for children.
But it's not going to sound good as a poem. They can play with it. So yeah, so because it has to be something. Joe's voice is what makes it. Joe's voice. But yeah, that song "Burning Lights," I hired a contract here.
The voice pretty good.
Pretty good. I mean, Joe is an amazing writer. I'm also a big Bob Dylan fan. Glenn Gould for classical piano. He was at Hepburger's, and actually, I think you can hear him grunting. He had a Tourette's type tic. And I learned about Glenn Gould from Oliver Sacks. So I'll listen to any number of things. It depends on my mood. If I'm feeling a little more tired and I need to be amped up, I'll listen to something louder, faster. If I'm feeling kind of keyed up and I need to bring the cadence down a little bit, then I'll listen to something a little mellower, poppier. I love bands like, I'm a big fan of this British pop band called James. There's like 20 bands named James, but this one, and again, I lose points for saying that, but they're amazing. And that's
I think you've accumulated enough points where you can afford to lose a few.
Yeah. But in any case, music and poetry are they're the subconscious, right? I mean, if you think about a Bob Dylan song or a really good Strummer song or a poem, that the words don't mean anything when read linearly, but they make you feel something. They're tapping into the subconscious. That's really what they're doing. They're pulling on neural threads of emotion based on either timbre or cadence or something that's independent of the word structure. And that to me is
I often say Johnny Cash's version hurt. I say it would be my favorite song ever.
we did a 9 Inch Nails song.
He
Produced that. I'm pretty sure.
yeah, produced it, and he did he pulled Johnny Cash out from a place to produce something that when you look back is one of the great things ever in music, which are these haunting covers of certain songs, originals.
Johnny Cash and Joe Strummer did a version of Redemption song together that Rick produced, which is on loop in my house sometimes, for hours and hours.
That song is fascinating. Bob Marley's
sung by Johnny Cash and Joe Strummer. Sometimes I think what it would be to be a fly on the wall, what these guys were doing for you.
There's certain songs where you're like, it elicit an emotion that's unlike anything else. I mean, I was trying to figure that out with Rick too. Like, there's certain songs that make you want to pull up over to the side of the road and just weep or just get inspired to just get shit done or all of those kinds of things. Or remember your family, the people you've lost, all that kind of stuff. You hurt. I hurt myself today to see if I still feel.
There's certain songs that I've loved so much that I actually won't play them during a relationship until the relationship passes a certain duration, because if you start sharing in those experiences with somebody and it starts to become associated with the relationship, you braid it in with the dopamine of love, and that relationship ends, the song is forever taken. There's certain songs that I will never play. They're mine. I just it's too risky to give those up. And I think that
There's like levels.
There are levels, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this kind of preparing for the solo episode, just interacting with Rick about that process of preparation, and because you mentioned the interviews. By the way, so are you do solo? Are you the only one in the room, or
No, well, it used to be Rob, my producer, who, I should say, he's really the person behind the podcast. I mean, first of all, we're equal partners.
you're just a pretty face?
We're just, and I'm aging, man. I actually really, I like agents. We had a lot of people like Dick, friends with David Sinclair, and it's all about not aging. I don't want to live past 90 minutes. I'm just trying to get as much done as I can in a short life with right integrity, heart, and accuracy.
And you like the stages.
Oh yeah. If you read Erickson's stages of development, you realize that every stage of life is a set of neural circuits trying to resolve a problem. And if you're going to try and avoid that progression, sure, you might live longer, but it's sort of like saying, like, do you want to go win the high school jiu-jitsu championship? No, you graduated high school a long time ago, right? So I actually look forward to the future, even if it means that I'm starting to shift. I think that my biology will shift. I'll fight that. I try to take good care of myself, but I don't want to get sick. I don't want to suffer. Who does? But I'm embracing this developmental arc. I mean, we're not children and then adults. Our entire life is one long developmental arc. And if you fail to embrace that, you fail to extract the richness of what it is to be a human being. So, in any event, I record, Rob is in the room. I'll sometimes stop and ask him for feedback if I feel like something's not landing right. So if it's clear, he'll let me know. If it's not clear, he'll let me know. Excuse me. And then, Costello used to be in the early days of the podcast, which was that long ago. He's snoring at my feet and farting and smelling up the room, and we're all just kind of like gasping for air. He's a bulldog, that's what they do. With him gone, it changed. The whole thing changed. There will be another dog soon. And as you know, I've been moving through that grief process, but having him there gave me a levity that I miss. But in my mind, he's still there. He's still there. So, and in time there'll be another dog, and who knows? Maybe there'll be a dog and a couple of infants running around, but that would be more distracting. So, but there's no podcast that exists just because of the podcast. This is true for Joe. It's true for your podcast. It's not just a staff of people that post stuff. That's just the top level culture. There's the constant feedback and iteration of what you want it to become, and trying to hold on to something that's essential. Because everything has to evolve, but you can't lose the essence of something. Anytime a company or brand or a course or a scientist has done that, it just ends up terrible. It just it becomes like a cemetery version of itself.
So to Rick is the power of the people in the room is great to inspire and to destroy. So you have to be extremely careful with the selection of people that are in the room. To me, I never really thought of it that way. I thought only positive things can happen.
But by adding people. Oh, if there were an audience, well, you know what? Someday I'd love to do a live podcast with you.
I saw you doing like a couple of, you're paving the way there.
Well, we did one. I went up to the University of British Columbia. Yeah, did a lecture on a college campus, and one of the main things that happened is this kid, so in his 20s, I think, stood up and said, I've never been on a college campus. I didn't think I could go to a college campus. And that I still rings in my mind. Whoever you are out there, that meant so much to me. So I was like, yes. There was something about that to me. I was like, okay, it made sense to come all the way up here in person. Because you can get out to a lot more people. Public speaking events, it's not like it's that lucrative or anything. I mean, unless you're a famous celebrity or politician or something. But that's not what it's about for us. It's really about connecting with people in the venue and for interacts like that. I don't know how many we will do, but I'm curious to see how it goes. But I'd love to do a podcast with you.
Is it energizing? My fear is the fear of the introvert. Is that I don't know if I can handle so much love and fascinating people all around. it's like, I don't know.
Like, oh, we'll invite a few haters too.
Well, yes. Yeah, but I love the haters too. But I don't know. No, it makes me nervous because Jordan Peterson early on, I got a chance to hang out with him.
No, right. He does a lot of guys.
Yeah, he does, like, he's now on tour where he does like everything.
But he doesn't have any small kids.
So no.
So yeah, do it before
It's
you
also exhausting. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm just speaking from an athlete perspective. Like, if you're Mick Jagger and all that stuff, it's just physically. I mean, you have to speak potentially for 2 hours, then off stage, like hanging out with people. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of hours to stay focused, to keep finding your place of like calmness and say.
Well, and you're staying in hotels, your circadian rhythm is disrupted. You're not getting your like cold and sauna and work out every day. Your food isn't optimal. I think done in patches, I could enjoy it. It's fun to meet people from different places. I'm doing a public lecture in Copenhagen for the Lundbeck Foundation in June 3rd. And that one is particularly, Lundbeck Foundation is an academic lecture. So the fact that when they invited, I asked, you want me to talk about what the lab does, and you want me to talk about the stuff on the podcast? They're like, no, not your lab. We want to hear about this like health stuff, that stuff that we cover on the podcast. So that was amusing me and tells me that, that things are changing now. I think 2020 and 2021 revealed a lot of things about people to ourselves. But one thing very clear is that there's an enormous appetite for tools for mental and physical health, but also understanding about science and how science is done. So to you, that's Mr. Flattery, it's a true gratitude. There's now a runway for scientists to talk to people. And you had I always forget this guy's name, the virus guy.
Vincent Racaniello.
Yeah, amazing, right? I mean, forgetting the controversy, all the stuff like 2020, 2021. I mean, he is an encyclopedia of all things virology.
Yeah. People should listen to his podcast, This Week in Virology. He's also an incredible lecturer and educator. It's fascinating. It's fascinating, yeah, when people take, again, that leap of putting all that education online. That's non-controversial at all. It's like everybody, people should go listen to him for the most part, in terms of, at his best at least. There's no politics in it.
No, he's a virus jock. He likes playing around with bacteria and viruses.
But that said, we all
molecular biology.
We all say stuff carelessly all the time. So he gets a bit of trouble on some of the things he said about like dismissing lab leak theory. Like, there's no way.
He dismisses that.
Yeah, but he's not making, like, folks. There's a difference when you say stuff like off the cuff, and when you say stuff that's like core to your principles, you've thought about it for a very long time. You're talking for hundreds of hours, and you can just say stuff. You can just say your opinions. Will Smith slapped.
I was wondering. Okay, wait. How long are we going to play? I was wondering how long it was going to take us before someone
talked about Ukraine.
No, Will Smith. I was wondering whether or not we make it. I had it planned. I was literally back 2 hours. I had, if we didn't talk about the Will Smith, the Chris Rock thing, it's amazing. This is the first conversation to happen in a long time with it wasn't French. No. Here we go. It revealed some interesting things about human beings, impulse control, and lack thereof. But oh my goodness. Chris Rock has material for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I think he's not short on material. I do. If I knew when I wanted to tweet, if I knew you were allowed to just slap me as my conversation with Tim Dillon and Godfrey, people just being humans. There's so much fascinating human nature on display there. It's also, in terms of it becoming a topic that a lot of people are talking about versus the war in Ukraine, for example, is also fascinating to watch. Like, just these kind of news cycles moving through.
Well, I think, if I may ask, anytime we observe something very limbic, very emotional, we generally can empathize somewhat, right? We all know what it's like to feel angry. We all know what it's like to feel shame. We all know what it's like to feel shock. Images of war are for most people, very hard to relate to. We see it. It's, there are these images, and they're very traumatic and challenging to look at times, and yet most people have no idea what it feels like to be shot at, or what it feels like to have their home destroyed, or what it feels like to be an aggressor in that way. So I think that people naturally orient towards things that feel familiar to them, even though the circumstances are different.
And people also forget, they look at these celebrities, it's just like Will Smith, but they forget that they're human too. That's one of the most surprising things for me, having done this podcast and met celebrities and stuff like that. They're humans. They're all human. And that's inspiring to me. Like some of these great folks that have won Nobel Prizes and built some cool things, they're just human, like the rest of us.
Well, and if you look at actors and actresses, I mean, there's some amazing ones, right? And who also do well in their outside life, but their careers were built on the business of pretending to be other people. And that's got to distort, maybe positively, but also just, let's be honest, what it is, that the neuroplasticity, the changes in the areas of the brain that represent personality have to be quite different for somebody who pretends to be lots of different personalities and gets paid for it. You're working the reward system into the system of self-identity, and you have to imagine that can really contort somebody's neurology in ways that maybe they are not maybe they're not in touch with reality in the same way that we are. Remember, earlier we were talking neurotic versus psychotic. They may be more borderline in their kind of ground state than you think. And so I'm actually impressed anytime they have an aspect of life. Yeah. I'm like, oh wow, finally somebody who's managed to maintain some semblance, at least from the outside, of normalcy.
So first of all, I can empathize with the actions that Will Smith did, right? They're not, I think they're kind of, not kind of, they're just shitty. You should probably talk privately, man to man, not, because otherwise it's like a dramatic display. It's almost like you are a fake, you're acting.
Well, there are all these questions, right? I mean, obviously it was aggressive at some level. There's this question of whether or not it was impulsive. I think most people feel yes. There's a question, there was the protective nature of it, because he was doing it to, it apparently in defense. But then there's also the context. He lost touch with the context, right? Whereas Chris Rock basically gets, there's the possible critique that he went too far. That's going to be in the eye of the beholder. But then, depending on how you view comedy and jokes, but then there's also the fact that he took that slap and then just snapped right back, so much so that people thought maybe, yeah. He also waited with his hands behind his back.
That's just natural. He likes to stand like that. I mean, I got to look at the story here to connect to what Chris Rock did. Like, I wish what Chris Rock did to take this out and keep going. First of all, just props for somebody able to maintain cool in that situation for the most part. I think I watched it once.
You only have to be alive on this planet. It's hard to say it. You can't avoid seeing.
I wish at that afterwards he would sort of say something loving and kind to Will Smith and his wife, and then hit him real hard and lean into the joke.
Yeah, but I think in hockey they call taking a number. I have a friend who plays hockey in their society. Like, if someone checks you really badly in the game, you don't go and check them again. You don't get into a fight. But 3 games later, you blame them and shit. So what? The ability to defer and to handle it in whatever fashion one feels.
They're probably also friends and all those kinds of things, that they respect each other. So you probably didn't. But there's a comedian instinct. I saw this. That was an open mic in here in Texas.
It's on with these average list.
No, so there is more sort of rougher kind of.
Yeah, you've been hanging out in West Texas.
Exactly.
Austin's too tame for Lex, so he's headed to West Texas.
Exactly. I put on a cowboy hat and instantly became a cowboy. I'm talking like a cowboy. I mean, I belong out there in the desert.
He's gone from eating, meat and athletic things, so rattlesnakes here. Rattlesnakes are exactly right.
No, there was a open mic. It was late at night, and I was one of the only people in the audience. There's a couple of drunk folks, a few drunk folks. One of them was a couple, and like bikers, like a guy and a girl, and then the comedian, the open mic comedian, did a joke about people who wear helmets. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but he did the joke. And then the guy about women who wear helmets. And the guy, it's this exact same situation. The guy stood up, walked through him. There's no flat. I think this happened before the Will Smith. So he walked up to the comedian and he like I think he like pointed his finger down and told him to stop or something like that, and then sat down. This is an audience of like 6 people, right? And at midnight around then, there's nobody, no security, nothing in Texas, which implies that this guy was the energy drunk, but also a biker, and his what he felt his lady was now attacked by the comedian, his words. And the comedian was a kind of out of shape, small guy, so he's not threatening at all, and probably in trouble. And the comedian, after he sat down, he looked a little scared. He paced back and forth, and then he did the joke again. And I was sitting, and I leaned back, and I touched this because that is common. And the guy was getting angry and angrier, and he just sat there. And the comedian went on for a couple more minutes, and then did another bad joke, but another joke about it. It's just like he leaned into it. If you go to a small comedy club, open mic or otherwise, you're in the shooting gallery. Like you're basically there, teed up as a pin to get it. We went and saw Andrew Scholes in San Francisco. Yeah, it was hilarious. It was amazing. I mean, he's just masterful in his ability to command the audience. But I felt for the people up front, but no sympathy either. Because you buy tickets to sit up front at a Scholes show, you're gonna get it. But he was very loving. Yeah. And it's funny. First of all, it's funny. The funniness really helps you, but the ethic of the comedian is like that fearlessness. What I really like is like the danger. There's risk to comedy, and there's also consequences. Have you watched that show? The Marvelous Miss Maisel show. It's really good. I watched a few of them. Guilty pleasure there. She plays a comic in the I think it was the mid 1960s in New York, and there's a character that somewhat resembles Lenny Bruce. He's sort of meant to be Lenny Bruce, and they're always getting arrested. And it's kind of, I didn't learn about it from Joe. Anyway, the writing is great. It's very funny. But yeah, comedy is designed to push boundaries and to get to say the thing that people feel they can't say. Not something in science, right? Etiquette is a big part of how you communicate ideas. It's about constrained communication. This is something I confess on the podcast, like the goals of making it clear, interesting, surprising, and actionable. You have to constrain the amount and the style of information. Otherwise, it becomes something else altogether. I saw Sandra CEO said that he likes the thing you mentioned, not the yoga nidra, but the NSDR, non-sleep deep rest podcast over meditation. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Why? What do you think that is? What do you think the difference is?
Yeah, so non-sleep deep rest, NSDR, is an acronym that I coined because it encompasses a lot of practices that are not meditation per se, but that bring the brain and body into a state of relaxation and focus. So hypnosis is one variant of NSDR. There are other variants of NSDR. You can just look these up and find them. And I think that they caught on, and the Google CEO of Google is an avid practitioner of NSDR because it has this amazing ability to reset your energy level and focus, whereas with meditation, many people find meditation hard. And part of the reason they find it hard is that it requires focus. NSDR is a state which is very calm and relaxing. You don't have to work too hard. You're just listening to a script. Whereas most forms of meditation, not all, but most forms of meditation involve cranking up the activity in your prefrontal and trying to see your thoughts as opposed to thinking your thoughts, or focus on your breath, but then third person yourself, and that's work. And so many people who meditate quite intensely feel more exhausted. Now, that doesn't mean that meditation doesn't have any utility, but it's distinctly different than SDR. And I think that people are working, certainly the CEO of Google, I can imagine, working really hard and using his forebrain. If he's going to have 20 or 30 minutes to take a break, he should, and I think this is what he's doing, he should go out for a jog and not listen to it, or sit there in a chair and just zone out, or do NSDR. The problem is people are not that good at shifting states. We are all actually good at, even people with severe ADHD, we did an episode about this, can become hyper-focused showing joy. Because dope and most of the drugs designed to treat ADHD are drugs that increase the level of dopamine. When you like something, there's dopamine release and focus. It's when you don't like something that's hard to focus. Shifting states is hard. I'm sure you've experienced this if you've ever been in deep research or podcasting, and then all of a sudden you go for a run. If I spend the first third of that run thinking, and then in the middle third, kind of that thinking is fractured a bit, and then in the final third is when you really get to relax, because the brain doesn't shift states very quickly. We can go from sleep to wakefulness quickly. We can go from wakefulness to sleep quickly, but we don't shift between different states of consciousness like a step function. Except in rare cases, right? Fear is one. All of a sudden we hear an explosion right now, it's a step function. We're in fear, or we're in alertness, right? A heightened state of alertness. But NSDR is terrific at allowing people to learn to shift their state. And I actually would venture to argue that part of the value of meditation and exercise is the actual state that you get into in deep meditation and exercise. But just as valuable is the transition that you have to take yourself through from one state of mind to the other and then back again. When I look, David Goggins, he always come up because he represents so many important things: drive, determination, override of emotional state, going from being a 300-pound plus person to a fit person through. He's never revealed anything substantial about what he ate or what he didn't eat. He basically says, like, listen, run a lot, eat less, right? But what's remarkable is so much of what he says is about those transitions, about taking oneself from a state of I don't want to scruffing oneself like you're going to do it anyway, and then being able to carry that into regular life, so to speak. So I think that NSDR is immensely powerful. It's zero cost, and one of the reasons I'm such a fan of people doing it is that most people don't stick to the meditation practice. There have also been a few cases you might find this interesting. There's a book by Scott Carney, I forget what it's called. I think it's called The Transcendence Trap or something. I'm going to have that wrong, but there have been a fair number of cases of people that go and do very expensive meditation, silent meditation retreats, who then return to normal life and end up killing themselves. There are states of mind inside of extended meditations or silent meditations that are very beneficial, and I'm certainly not suggesting people don't meditate, but I know at least one person who came back from one of these long extended meditation retreats and wasn't able to shift their state back into one that was functional in regular life. And that book includes a very traumatic story. I don't want to give it away because people check out the book, but Scott told the story to me directly once, where someone feels they've reached enlightenment and then commit suicide. So these very unusual brain states are potentially hazardous if people can't return.
So it's nice to focus not on those brain states, but instead on the shifting.
Right. I do. This morning I woke up a little bit earlier than I would like. I use this Reverie app that's research-backed, reveri.com. There's a free version of it, or you can try it for free. So I think as far as hypnosis, and I do a self-hypnosis to put me back into sleep, and if I can't sleep, just put me into a state of deep relaxation. I would put hypnosis under the category of NSDR, yoga under the category of NSDR. There are now some NSDR scripts online if you just go to YouTube that you can just listen to it.
Do you like those?
I do, yeah. I think the one from Big Four is quite good. I have an affiliation with them, but it's free, so I feel confident mentioning it. I do. I really like the Rabbi app. I can the more you do them, the more quickly you can shift your brain into a state of deep relaxation. I will sometimes stop mid podcast. Sometimes our recordings go 7-8 hours, and I'll stop and I'll do a 1 minute hypnosis. They have 1 minute hypnosis inside Rabbi. You're only going to find that 1 minute hypnosis is effective if you are routinely doing 10 and 15-minute hypnosis in addition to that. Meaning, I do it every other day, so 10.
So there's a YouTube 1 minute hypnosis, or is this?
There are, but inside of Rabbi as well, you can find like a really good.
Pull it up, sorry.
Yeah, so please put in the Michael C. Sealby. He has some long hypnosis scripts, but again, these are all free, and there's a lot of good research now on neural networks, and it shifts your so-called default mode network. It shifts how much of your forebrain you're using, and it also is very, very good at I get so many questions about, hey, I'm really upset. I found out about my girlfriend's sexual path. Hey, I'm so upset. I found out that my boyfriend was cheating. Or, oh, so-and-so died. How do I get over these emotions? How do I deal with them? And hypnosis has shown to be very useful for people to learn to bring themselves into a state of deep relaxation, to literally project in their mind's eye these very intense things that they don't like. And then for people to associate with other emotions in their body, to learn to be calm while feeling your feelings. That's communication to some extent.
Just observe the feelings.
Associate them with positive experience. If you're an Android guy, so soon it should be available on Android. And
then it doesn't exist for me.
No.
Android is the device of the people, all you elitist people with your iPhone.
It's about Android. Now you want to the one thing that gets me, because I'm very close to someone who uses Android. I feel like that.
So you have great people in your life. That's good.
No, the messages always look green to me, but I answer yours. Despite that. But I feel like the Android phones are very trigger happy. Like anything I touch does something, whereas the Apple phone is kind of for like a macaque monkey to be able to operate, which is great for me because I'm more of a macaque monkey and you're a more sophisticated.
Oh, I see.
I think like you have to be
more sensitive.
You have to have, I've got fat fingers, I've got clumsy fingers.
So the Android is too, well, maybe you need to softly touch.
What I would do is go into the sort by most popular, because there's some older ones that I like. So I'll do this one, the hypnosis for clearing subconscious negativity. That's an hour-long one. The sleep and anxiety one, 40 minutes. But those you listen to as you fall asleep. Oh, we're gonna do this now.
Yeah.
I've created this hypnosis recording for to help you.
This is the voice. How often does the voice pop up?
At the same time,
You don't watch it.
you just listen to it. And one of the most important things with the great workers of the self-hypnosis experience is to know enemies doing.
So people really should know that stage hypnosis is about the hypnotist getting you to do things that you don't want to do. Self-hypnosis, which is what we're talking about here, reverie, and this is about you getting your brain into the state that you want. And again, there's a ton of neuroimaging that work on trauma and pain relief, and our labs are working on this with David Spiegel's lab. I really encourage people to explore NSDR, and if this feels a little too wacky out there, then I would just put in NSDR into YouTube, and there's some good NSDR scripts.
Yeah, that's, by the way, Conrad's a fan of your podcast.
Yeah, so I don't know him, and but I would get a lot of media outlets picked up on his love of NSDR, and I can imagine running juggling a lot of
dissertation on it.
From my height, I can see San Quentin. It's really weird. The San Quentin and Alcatraz, the Bay Area, there's the Bay, there's Alcatraz and San Quentin. It's amazing how easy it is to overlook that they're there and forget that they're there. But when I drive by San Quentin, I think about it. I also think about the people who are in there who might be innocent. I've seen some of those episodes on Rogan and elsewhere. And Amanda Knox talks a lot about this, right? Whether or not you believe her story or not, I happen to believe her story personally based on what I know. I'm sure there are people who disagree with me. I think to myself, what it must be like to be in a cell and know in your heart's heart you didn't do it. I can't think of many things worse. I can't think of anything.
That's so clearly unjust, but life is full of unjust things. Cruel things happen all the time. You lose a loved one for no good reason. You lose your job. You lose your home. Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of refugees now. And, the war in Ukraine has really focused my mind to how much suffering there's in the world. And so just cruel things happen all the time. And people kind of, there's this suffering. You kind of go on. You stick to the people really close to you. There's still love all around you. Traumatic events kind of focus your mind on like very practical, like how do we solve the problem? How do we escape? Let's solve like survival, food, shelter, focus.
Remember that book, All's Quiet on the Western Front by World War I? There's this line in there, I forget what it is, about how war is like the smell of a skunk. Like a little bit is actually a little, there's something slightly delicious of it, is what it says in the book. I happen to like the smell of like ferrets and skunks and things. I had a pet ferret when I was a kid, and I like that musky scent. Most people just, it's repulsive to them. It's actually a gene, believe it or not. Some people have the gene that makes the musky scent repulsive. Some people love it. Let me ask you this. There's another gene. This is a fun one. Microwave popcorn. Good, neutral, or disgusting. Good. There are people who have a gene that leads them to the perception that the smell of microwave popcorn that you find is good. It smells like putrid vomit to them. It's a particular gene variant, and they can smell certain elements within the microwave popcorn. It's prominent in France, this gene, and so in laboratories where you have a lot of French people, it's often looking at microwave popcorn smells putrid, disgusting. So a lot of it's in the perception of people.
But okay, before I leave the NSDR, focus in general, as you said, it's for shifting mind states. Is there advice you have for how to achieve focus on a task?
Yes. First of all, we have to distinguish between modulators and mediators, and I'll do this very briefly. There are a lot of things that will modulate your state of focus, but they don't directly mediate your sense of focus. So for instance, if right now a fire alarm went off in this building, it would modulate our attention. We would get up and leave. It would be very hard to do what we're doing with that banging in the background. Be still first. So it's modulating focus, but it's not really involved in the mechanisms of focus, right? In the same way, being well rested when you sleep, your autonomic nervous system that adjusts states of alertness and focus and calm works better than when you're sleep deprived. So if you're sleeping better, you're going to focus better. So I always answer this way to a question like this, because the best thing that anyone can do for their mental health, physical health, and performance in athletic or cognitive endeavors or creative endeavors is to make sure that you're getting enough quality sleep, enough of the time for you. And that's going to differ. We can talk about what that means. Now, in terms of things that mediate focus, without getting into the description of mechanisms, because we have podcasts about that, it's very clear that mental focus follows visual focus, provided that you're a sighted person. Much of the training that's being done now in China to teach kids to focus better literally has them stare at a target, blinking every so often, but really training themselves to breathe calmly and maintain a tight visual aperture. When you read, you have to maintain a tight visual aperture. You're really scrolling like a highlighter in your mind's eye, right? It's kind of obvious once you hear it. So for people that have problems focusing, sleep well, learn to dilate and contract your visual field consciously. This can be done, you can practice it a little bit. And then, as I said before, it is very hard to get into a state of focus like a step function, like snapping your fingers. What you can do is you can pick any object, but ideally an object at roughly the same distance, placed at roughly the same distance to which you're going to do that work, and stare at it. You're allowed to blink. And as your mind starts to drift every once in a while, to understand that's normal, but try and narrow your visual aperture and bring that into your visual field so that that's the most prominent thing, kind of like portrait mode in your phone. This would look very different in portrait mode than it would in just a standard photograph mode. And then after doing that for 30 to 60 seconds, moving into the work that you're about to do and really encourage yourself to do that. If you're somebody who's low vision or no vision, you're going to use your ears to do this. Braille readers have trouble focusing sometimes because they feel other stuff and they hear other stuff. So you learn to adjust that aperture consciously. And then, of course, there are the pharmacologic tools. Just enough caffeine, but not too much, right? We talked about white noise, brown noise, music, or no music. It really varies, but it's very clear that binaural beats of 40 hertz can shift the brain into a heightened state of focus and cognition. So if you're going to use binaural beats, which you definitely use with headphones, and there are a number of free apps out there and sources, 40 hertz seems to be the frequency that best supports the brain shifting into a particular.
You give us some binaural beats.
Yeah, so you're going to look for, you want to find an app that offers 40 hertz. I think Brainwave allows you to slide bar up to the particular frequency that you want. And I should say that there are other frequencies that are interesting, but 40 hertz binaural beats seems to be the one that there's the most quality research on.
So it's like a beat.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Then, but you're saying there's a lot of mixed science on white noise and binaural noise.
You really should be doing this with headphones because binaural beats are best accomplished by feeding two different frequencies to the two ears. Yeah. And then you have what's called this brainstem area that reads out what are called binaural time differences, and then it extracts the delta, essentially.
Turn it up.
And then in other things that can enhance focus. So, the pharmacology around this is pretty interesting. Things that tickle the dopamine pathway, the acetylcholine pathway, they work. Yeah. There's your Ritalin, your Adderalls, your modafinils, which are prescription, and there's a lot of non-prescription use of those prescription drugs. Not so much in my generation, but in people 35 and younger. I hear all the time from day traders and programmers and stuff, and kids that play video games, a lot of Ritalin, Adderall abuse. I think that unless it's prescribed by a doctor for a specific purpose of ADHD, I don't think people should go that route. Frankly, hits the dopamine system way too hard. Also, has a number of negative effects on sexual side effects, all sorts of things that you just don't want. There are a few compounds like alpha GPC, 300 milligrams to 600 milligrams of alpha GPC with a cup of espresso. If you're well rested, you're like a laser, maybe 2 hours, but then it's going to taper off. You have to just recognize that. And then there's this whole world of nootropics now. People trying to figure out that racetams, paracetams, phenylethylamine combined with this, and it's not quite in the place where you'd like it to be. There are a few companies that are doing this better than others. We talk about some of these on the podcast, but I would always start with behavioral tools and then consider pharmacology. And then I suppose the other thing for focus is this is a little more esoteric, but we covered this in an episode on workplace optimization. Where you place your screen is important. Staring down at a screen is not going to be as effective as placing it at eye level or above you. When the eyes are up, literally your eyes are directed forward or up, the brainstem centers for alertness are activated. When your eyes are down, it's actually you're sort of, it's like being pulled underwater a little bit in the autonomic arousal sense. You're closing your eyes. It reflects the brainstem centers that are active becoming less, or for alertness, becoming less active. But there's a really cool effect that's active in this room right now, which is that there have been some really interesting studies that when people work in small, compact spaces or wear a hoodie or a hat, that can also improve focus, like blinders on a horse, for obvious reasons now, based on what I said before, but also analytic work, or the kind of work where there's a correct answer that you're seeking, is best supported by these kind of low ceiling environments, whereas there's something called the cathedral effect, which is when you work in an outdoor environment or a high ceiling environment, it lends itself to kind of, pun intended, kind of loftier ideas and more creativity. And that probably has to do with the fact that there's a natural tendency, a reflex, to expand your visual field in these high ceiling environments. Expansion of the visual field changes the way the brain works in the time domain. Your engineering and biology oriented listeners will understand this, and music. For those that don't, the best way to think about it is when you have a narrow focus portrait mode on your phone, or you're very alert, you are fine slicing life in time. It's like think of it as a high frame rate, like you're shooting in slow motion. When you have when you dilate your view, you're taking bigger time bits. And then one way to just let this hopefully land home is that if you've ever had a really exciting day or podcast interview or experience of any kind, your system is flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine, alertness and motivation, all this excitement. It seems like it goes by very, very fast. And yet when you think back to that, it seems like a lot happened. This happened and that happened. Now think about waiting in the doctor's office in a blank waiting room with no interesting art on the walls. It feels like it goes by very, very slow. Dopamine and norepinephrine are all-time low. And yet when you think back on that experience, it's as if nothing happened because you were parsing time differently. So those are roughly the tools and the neurochemicals around time perception, time domain. There's a wonderful book, I'm forgetting the title, so wonderful I forget the title, by Dean Bordomano from UCLA. I think it's called The Brain is a Time Machine, that talks about this expansion and contraction of the time domain and what you can do to leverage it for work and creativity focus.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think one way to find focus for me is the experience, the feeling of focus is losing track of time, is getting to a place where you're no longer operating in time.
Well, and you mentioned being, kind of cramming for something. You'll release a lot of adrenaline, and it is true you can get a lot done under pressure because of the way that you're slicing time. You don't actually have more time. It's that you're finally in a brain state that lends itself well to parsing information very quickly. Now, if we ramp up your level of stress enough, it's definitely it's a more or less normal distribution. You get you stressed enough, it's hard to remember anything without parsing time well. But in that middle range, almost every study shows that the higher levels of autonomic arousal, meaning norepinephrine, adrenaline in your system, the more effective you are at things. And we always hear stress and adrenaline, this is bad. But my colleague Ali Crum at Stanford has done these beautiful studies where if you just educate people on how adrenaline makes them sharper thinkers, they become sharper thinkers. If you educate them on the fact that stress makes your cognition worse, their cognition gets worse. This is why I don't wear a sleep tracker. If you tell people they slept poorly, your recovery score sucks, they naturally perform less well the next day than if you tell them your recovery score is high. And so I don't have anything against those companies, but in fact, we use some of their technology to be very useful in certain contexts. But you want to determine your mindset around these things. And if you tell yourself, hey, deadlines make me sharp, pressure makes me sharp, you will perform better.
Stress and anxiety. What is that, and can it be leveraged for good?
Absolutely. Stress and whether or not you get into a cold ice bath or a hot sauna so hot you want to get out, or get hit square in the face with something over text that you really didn't want to hear or see. It's adrenaline. It's just adrenaline. And so your subjective readout of that and what it means is really important.
And you can just channel that.
Well, you can. If you agree with the following statement, which I do, and many people do because the data support it, which is Alan Crumb's statement, not mine, which is she directs the Mind Body Lab at Stanford. She's brilliant, by the way, brilliant Harvard trained. Yale trained licensed clinical psychologist, also tenured professor. So she's an Olympian, a Division I athlete in gymnastics and martial arts. And her dad is a longtime martial arts trainer. And he's done work with special forces. He's an amazing human being and very humble, very kind, lovely woman and professor, scientist. She says anything that you do and experience, but especially stress, is the consequence of that thing and what you believe about that. And so if you consume a lot of information about the powers of stressful states to bring out the best, you will perform better. If you consume a lot of information about the power of stress to cripple you, you will perform worse. There's absolutely no question. The data are striking. And this is not growth mindset. This is just simply what do you believe about stress based on the dominant knowledge that you consume. So that's what. But it's fun to watch David Goggins, here we go again, David, or Jocko, or Joe, or Cam Haines, put out this information about, or Ryan Hall, who ran for Stanford and then now is like into the powerlifting thing and running. And there are others too, of course. When you start to consume a lot of that information, it's not just inspiring, it actually it changes your perception of what your own stressful states mean. You can actually get better from stress if you're in the ocean of knowledge that stress grows you. If you're living in the ocean of knowledge, I was thinking like a pool in the summer. You got the kiddie pool, which is all peeing in it, presumably. You got the diving, you got the high diving. If you believe that the experience of belly flopping off the high dive is going to make you a better diver, in some sense, at least in this analogy, it will. Whereas if you feel that it's just the most embarrassing thing ever, and it's going to cripple your ability to get out and dive in front of anybody ever again, well, you're right about that too.
Yeah, we actually talked with Carl about depression, all this kind of things, that there could be these, what are commonly seen as negative journeys, they could be, when reframed, can be used.
One of the reasons I enjoy our friendship so much is that you bring this Russian thing, which I don't really understand it at a deep level. How could I? I'm not Russian, but this mindset, like that, there's pain in life. When I watched that Hedgehog in the Fog cartoon, I thought, no wonder he's Russian. This is the most abrasive. He's beautiful and sad, but so sad. Whereas out here, it's like Sesame Street, and my mother would not let me watch Sesame Street when I was a kid. She thought it was too chaotic.
Too chaotic.
Too chaotic. She's like, it's too chaotic.
Too many things going on.
Captain Kangaroo, we were allowed, and then Mr. Rogers, we were allowed. I didn't really like shows. I like doing things outside in the yard. I was trying. Trap oriented. I didn't want to watch stuff on TV, but Hedgehog in the Fog is enough to turn any kid into a thinker, a philosopher, and a poet. Here we go. I fell in love with this when we showed. You can even watch something arms behind its back.
So for people who don't know, and we're watching little clips here to get into, and it's a hedgehog that is wandering about in this fog at night, and
you can't even see it. The fog is so good.
And there's a feeling of searching, and then there's a horse that speaks from a distance, words of wisdom. Some people actually told me that they believe that's God. That's supposed to represent God. I always thought it was a motherly voice, a voice of conformity that wants you to return to safety. There's channels to communicate difficult ideas to people, and you figure out those channels. And so one of those channels was children's cartoons. So actually, they're very much for adults. I, I like that in some countries, not so much in the U.S., uh, children are treated with more respect for their intelligence, you know, and not constantly getting this dribble of just kind of moronic explosions and whistles and bells and the voice. Um, you treat them like morons, and they're going to behave how dumb is this child? No, there's intelligence in these dumb, simple questions. That a child asks. And I always love those questions, the simplicity, but also the depth of those questions.
The
Why?
reason I started watching your podcast was you did an episode early on with Ray Dalio. And maybe the first, but a question that you definitely asked him was you just said, what is money? And his answer was fantastic. It's a superb question, and he gave a superb answer. And I never would have thought to ask that question. And it's the question. And it was the question to tee things off with. So simple questions that get right to the heart of the matter. And kids aren't often putting the same cultural filters, and they're not kids that generally aren't concerned about getting canceled either. So they'll ask the question that no one else is going to ask,
and they're not concerned about how dumb the question sounds. I find the most fascinating questions really, really simple, and it is a bit embarrassing to ask those simple questions. Like, what is anything?
You're asking them for all of us, so please ask them. I think that question, what is money, is crucial, and I think the simple questions are the most interesting.
I can ask you about, you have awesome podcasts. I can ask you questions about basically all your podcasts. People should definitely listen to these people in the lab, but with Andy Gap in the conversation, he talked about strength and muscle building and all that kind of stuff. He's an encyclopedia.
And he also works with a lot of UFC fighters, and he has a lab that includes gym, and so he works on endurance and powerlifting and also hypertrophy training, etc. But he also does muscle biopsy. So he runs the full spectrum, and he's a full tenured professor, and he does all this stuff. So he's a really unique person in this whole fitness landscape, because there are a lot of PTs out there. There are a lot of kinesiologists. There are a lot of people studying nutrition and sports training. But I think he has among the people out there, he's at least in the top 5, probably within the top 3 of people that really have their arms around the full extent of what's possible with training. And he works with the UFC.
He's just in a very systematic way of describing things that was really nice. Skill, speed, power, strength, hypertrophy, so muscle mass, right? Endurance, all kinds of, and then the philosophical of the adaptation, how to overload stuff, all that. Is there stuff? I'll ask you about ice bath and sauna, which was surprising to me there. Is there stuff you took away from that conversation, like principles about how to get strong, how to build muscle mass, that broaden and deepen your understanding of that task?
Definitely, and I'll do these in bullet points because if people want the logic behind the mechanism, they can listen to that episode. It's a really good episode. I'll start with heat and cold really quickly and just say that avoid cold immersion, so ice baths and being in cold water up to the neck, uncomfortably cold, within the 4 hours after a training session that's designed to evoke an adaptation, either endurance, hypertrophy, or strength, because the inflammation that you experience from a hard endurance workout or from a hard strength or a hard hypertrophy workout is the stimulus that you're going to adapt to. The cold water immersion reduces inflammation and can short circuit some of that. After 4 hours, you're probably okay, but if you can do it a different day or you can do it before those sessions, that's better. Heat, however, can be done immediately after training, and it's probably beneficial because of the way that it dilates the vascular system and perfuses the muscles and ligaments, etc., with more nutrients.
And I should just mention that was a crucial piece of information. It's a little bit surprising. Was it surprising to you?
Absolutely. Because the way I posed the question to him about cold was, I hear that getting into an ice bath or a cold water immersion after training can reduce hypertrophy, but I'm guessing it's not that big of a deal. He said, no, it is a big deal. It will short circuit your progress. Now, for people that are only interested in performance, who are doing a lot of workouts and trying to recover, but not trying to grow muscle, get stronger, or build endurance, then it makes sense to do cold. Because skill development, or you're an athlete in season, so you have to. What's so great about Andy is he really points out the specific ways to train given your specific goals.
So if we're getting swole, stay out of the ice bath after a workout.
Like to always make fun of it. I love it. I put myself in the head category only because I don't do a real sport now. I work out and I run, which is
an aspiring me kind of thing. So
one of these days I'm going to get back to jiu-jitsu. Or Now, in terms of training, he has this beautiful 3x5 concept for strength. Pick 3 exercises, compound exercises, multi-joint movements. Do 3 to 5 exercises for 3 to 5 repetitions per set. Rest 3 to 5 minutes and do that 3 to 5 times per week. And for details, you can again look to the episode. It's time stamped. But what's interesting about this is 3 to 5 times a week is a lot for us. Like squatting 5 times a week for 5 reps, meaning you're working pretty heavy. You're close to failure, but not failure on for strength generally. What Andy taught me is that people who are training mostly for strength can do these low rep type regimens frequently because most of the adaptation is neural, and because you're not pushing to failure in most cases, you don't get that sore. And so it's the motor neurons getting the muscle fibers to contract more intensely or with more efficiency in other ways that's leading to these strength gains. And this is why powerlifters can train every day or 5 days a week or 4 days a week. For hypertrophy, I learned from Andy that the repetition range can be pretty broad. You think anywhere from 6 to 30 repetitions. You should do 10 sets per muscle group per week, maybe even a bit more. So high volume, but you have to go to failure or beyond in order to stimulate growth. Why does it work at such a great range of repetitions? Well, there apparently are 3 ways that you stimulate hypertrophy, maybe more. One is tissue, microdamage to the tissue. The other is through some sort of tension-based changes in the molecular gene programs of cells that lead to protein synthesis that are distinct from damage. The other are metabolic effects of like high repetition work of superfusion of the muscle with blood. We know that third category exists because people are now doing this blood restriction training where they cuff off a muscle and they use a really light weight. I've done these before. You can use a 5-pound weight, you curls with this, and you are in pain and the muscles are swelling up with blood. It does lead to hypertrophy, but in general, you're not sore, you're not doing tissue damage. And by the way, don't just tourniquet off a muscle because you have to use the proper cuffs. Because you need the blood still to flow in one direction. You can't just cinch it off. You should kill your steel blood. So get the appropriate cuffs. They're out there. And then for endurance, I learned something really cool. So I work out basically. I go to the gym every other day on average.